Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. Welch. The first podcast of the new year, and it's a good one. It's a long one, but you guys have heard me for years talk about my motor inside the Bull Run bus and the motor I had built for my gray Type 34 car Magia, and those both of those motors were built by Jake Raby, who is probably the foremost Type 4 expert. He's been doing Type 4s for it's got to be over 30 years at this point. We get his history. It's long and it's varied, and we go through a lot of cool discussions with respect to different developments and things that he's done with the Type 4 motor. So it's good. We start out with his history in the military and get a bunch of background on him, and then we just kind of go through the different things that he did development from the time that he built my first motor for me in 2001 to the motor he built for me in 2009. And then we just talk about the variations with technology, things he's pursued, things that have worked, things that haven't worked. And there's a lot of good conversation, but don't forget to support those that support your favorite podcast. Go to vwtrendsmagazine.com, subscribe today. VW Trends Magazine, 4 issues a year. Go subscribe today at vwtrendsmagazine.com. Also, Ross Wolf, high quality aftermarket parts built for enthusiasts by enthusiasts. Go pick up some cool stuff for your car. Velocity stacks, dipsticks, Viton seals, bus dash cover plates, rear bus deck lid stainless steel hinges. You name it, they got it. Go check out their website today at rosswolf.com. And don't forget to use the code LTD10 for 10% off. That's rosswolf.com. Wolf with a U, rosswolf.com. Also, quick announcement on some of the stuff that's happening coming up this year. Volkswagen Air-Cooled Festival is going to be happening Saturday, June 13th. So if you're looking for that Southern California trip in June, Saturday, June 13th is going to be the Volkswagen Air-Cooled Festival taking place at Santa Anita Park in the infield. You guys can register today. Go to VW Kids Instagram to go check that out. I'll leave a link in the description down below for their log in for their ticketing so you guys can get registered. The load in is Friday night before. The event is from 11 to 5 p.m. on Saturday. So for more details, check out the link in the description below. And before that, MP is putting on an air-cooled appreciation week for their distributors. So March 9th to the 14th, go support your MP distributor, and there'll be a nationwide at no cost to you as part of the celebration. Each participating dealer will receive a supply of their exclusive tote bags and be given the first 50 customers to visit their shop and spend $50 in MP parts during the MP Air-Cooled Appreciation Week. Go check it out. Support your local MP dealers and keep the hobby alive. And with that, guys, I wish you all a happy and prosperous new year. I did want to mention that, unfortunately, the recent passing of Doug Berg, kind of sudden that he passed away in his sleep. So God bless him and his family at this time, and my prayers for his family go out, and it's unfortunate, guys. So make sure you guys keep those connections tight. Tell your friends how much you care about them, what you feel about them, and live your life like you never know what can happen. So appreciate all that Doug's contributed to the hobby. He's done so much, the Berg family as a whole, but Doug, kind of being the brains and the mad scientist behind the whole thing, it's definitely going to impact the scene a little bit that he's no longer with us, and it's just a shame. But God bless him and his family, guys, and the same to you guys. It's a shame. Try to get Doug on the podcast a few times, and just trying to track down and get that history locked in. So unfortunately, didn't get to make it happen, but definitely spent some time with him at the racetrack up there in Medford. And he always gave me some good advice when I chatted with him. He's just a good, supportive guy, real part of the fabric of the scene. So he'll surely be missed. Well, guys, without any further ado, let's get into it this week. Type 4 technology, development, and the history from Jake Raby's perspective on this week's Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.
Okay, everybody. So on today's podcast, I'm really excited. I've got a long-time friend. I've got a guy I've known for probably 20 years. He's built a couple engines for me. And I know you guys kind of get worn out when I start talking about the Type 4, the real power, the big block power. But our guest today on the podcast is the one and only Jake Raby. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, and if a lot of you guys, so you guys are, most of you guys should, I know you guys know the name Jake Raby, but Jake is one of the premier Type 4 engine builders. I would say probably worldwide. He's doing it over 25 years at least. And he's an educator. He is committed to the community, and he's a guy that he likes to forge his own path. And one of the things that I like about Jake is he's not scared to try something different or do his own thing, or to admit when he's made a mistake, or actually say, I've been using this for a long time, this works better, and now we're switching to that. So there's something unique about a person whose character is like that and can drive that. But Jake, before we get into the whole Type 4 discussion, we start the podcast with this one question every time. And what's your VW story, and how did you get into Volkswagens?
Well, that's a long one, but I think it certainly has a lot of merit in this situation because, as I was growing up, my dad had all kinds of sayings and things. And here in the South, we live by the sayings that come from our family. And his big thing was nothing ever stays the same. And I've seen things come and go a lot, and it all started with that history. So the true VW story started when I was about 7 years old. I came home. Actually, my real Volkswagen story started in a '73 Volkswagen thing that we had when I was born, so it's an orange '73 thing. My dad had a bunch of knee problems. He couldn't bend down to change oil, things like that. So when I was about 7, I was tasked with changing the oil in a '73 thing.
Nice. And
so that's kind of what started it. And then about a year later, of course, we all had farm chores and things. And, I got $10 a week for allowance, and I had to work hard to get that. And if I didn't work hard, then I would lose part of it. Or I would lose all of it, not get anything. So we had this neighbor that lived about a mile up the road, and he lived in a concrete house with no windows, and he ran a chicken farm.
Yikes.
And in my world, when I was growing up there and here in the mountains of Northeast Georgia, you basically did three things for work. You either worked at the mill, you worked on or lived on a chicken farm, or you made moonshine. That was about it. This was truly Appalachia. It grew into something way different than that today, with everybody populating this area from other areas. But so this guy was a true Appalachian in every way. And he came down one day and he said, "Hey, I need some money." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "I've got a push mower that won't run, and I'll sell it to you for $10. I need some money for some beer." And I'm like, okay. And this guy had a still in the back and all that sort of thing. And, but he wanted beer. So, and he actually used beer as part of his distilling process. So, just to kind of catalyze things a little bit. So anyway, I pay him either $8 or $10 for this lawnmower. I bring it home. I didn't know anything about it. And this story gets pretty crazy because across the creek from where I lived, there was a guy that lived in a school bus.
Yeah.
And I still don't know his name, but he went by Bear. And he ran the county shop next door where they worked on all the heavy equipment and stuff. And he lived in a school bus, literally, and he had a bunch of Volkswagens.
Wow.
So I went down to him and I said, "Hey, I got this mower. This guy, John, don't know how to make it run, whatever." He goes, "I bet the flywheel's got rust on it. It has no spark, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, it doesn't have any spark." He's like, "Okay, clean the rust off the flywheel. I bet you'll have spark and it'll crank and run." So I go back to the shop, which was just a hog pen, basically, that had a dirt floor, and I worked on top of a broken freezer that hadn't worked in years. And I commenced to clean the flywheel up, and I get it running. So I turn around, paint the thing, make it look like something, and put it on our local radio station, which had this swap shop show that came on at 9 o'clock every morning. And so I put it out there for trade or sell, and the guy's like, "Okay, I'll trade you a broken snapper mower, riding mower, a Snapper Comet for that thing." He's like, "The snapper needs a transmission." And I'm like, "Okay." So I make him that trade. I get that. It didn't need a transmission. It needed about a $15 clutch put on it. So I put a $15 clutch on it, paint that thing up, make it look like something, listed that for sale. And then a guy was like, hey, I've got a 1970 Beetle. I'll trade you for that Snapper mower if you'll give me $50 boot money. And I'm like, well, let me see if I can do that. So my dad came up with some stuff I could do to make $50. I make the $50. I trade with him. I get a 70 model Beetle. I still have that car. It is absolutely destroyed. So by this time I was like, 10, something like that. And so my dad had zero mechanical aptitude. He was a banker. He knew nothing about stuff. Now he could fix something, but it was a challenge for him. But both my grandfathers were extremely mechanical. My grandfather on my mom's side, he never had a job. All he did was make moonshine, and he had a bunch of different businesses that were used as cover-ups to launder the money. He couldn't read or write. He quit school in third grade and started making liquor with the rest of the family. So, but he made millions of dollars, and he even made a moonshine still that made ethanol for the University of Georgia, which is kind of a crazy story. Wow. Because they couldn't figure out how to make it work. So they went to a guy that had zero education, could not read or write, to figure it out. So, and then my grandfather on my dad's side, he invented all kinds of crazy stuff, a wireless potentiophone that was the first means of mass communication around 1909. It was a wireless telegraph that could send 100 messages at a time. He did all kinds of crazy stuff, built power plants, worked on a thing called the Kettering bug, which was a flying bomb in 1916 with Charles Kettering, who was his high school classmate, and went on to be the guy that started AC Delco. So a crazy mechanical history on both sides, because my grandfathers both could do anything. I mean, my grandfather that had no education was basically a chemist. He could do things with distilling that nobody else could do. And he learned it by doing it. So anyway, my dad could see that I had gotten this aptitude clearly from my dad's side. So he wanted me to explore that stuff. So we found a guy had about 80 Volkswagens and probably 200 engines, and all he did was make sand rails and Myers makes buggies, and the guy started needing money or whatever. So we go over and we buy it all. Well, we had this, I grew up on what was a chicken farm, and the history is that property where I grew up is where Raby's air-cooled technology still is today. Right. Yeah. So it's family property. And these buildings, I've converted them. You'd never know it now, but literally 2 of them were just chicken houses. So I go back and I take the one section of this chicken house, and on one side there was, my grandfather had pigs on one side. The other side I kind of cleaned up, quote unquote, and made a bit of a shop area. And I started taking apart these Volkswagen engines and putting them back together. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I went across the creek to see Bear again, because I took the old John Muir book, the Complete Idiot Guide. In that book, I've still got the original one, and that I learned from as a kid. And that book has driven me to be an educator with technical things, and it has driven my way of educating people. Because a lot of people think the way I do that are Porsche technicians or whatever, and they need to understand things in that format in the very beginning of when you're trying to teach these people. And as my daughter and I have created a mechanical classroom program where we're literally training, middle school kids on small engines, I've kept that same format just as a bit of the craziness there. But so anyway, this Bear guy, I was able to do everything except for adjust valves. And to me, adjusting valves was like, oh my God, that's this huge task, right? How do I do this? Like I'd understood all the 4 strokes, intake, compression, powered exhaust. I'd put things together, but I just couldn't adjust valves. So finally, that guy comes over. He shows me how to adjust valves. By this time, I think I was probably about 12. And keep in mind, I had like 250 engines. This building was 30 feet wide and 165 feet long. And I had one whole side of it that was just covered in this stuff. So, and I kept buying cars. Like I started patching these motors up. And back then, people were still driving Volkswagens daily a lot, and they just needed something that was cheap. So I was taking, and just kind of, dirt floor building stuff and selling it. I was in business and didn't really even realize I was in business.
Really?
As just being a kid, because we only had one Volkswagen guy in the whole county, and he stayed so covered up that he couldn't do anything else. And people started to learn that I did it. And then the local parts store found out that I did it. And then they would start sending me people. I mean, they're sending me customers per se. So I started doing this, and I started making money. And then I started buying more cars. So I had my first paying customer for a 914 engine when I was 13. Mm-hmm. And the 914 engine, being a Type 4, was like way out in left field. But a lot of people used them on buggies around here because they had a lot of torque. We're up in the mountains. They needed torque, and they already made it perfectly to a bus transmission. Everybody wanted to use a bus transmission. So that was my first experience with Type 4s. But I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
And blow a lot of people's minds. I didn't like them. I didn't like them at all. Not at all.
Really? A lot heavier, a lot bulkier to work with?
Well, when I was a kid, I didn't understand them, and because they were more technical. A bug engine, you could take that thing apart on the dirt floor. You could wash the cylinder walls out with beer, which I did when I was a Marine out in California, and we broke an engine out in Glamis, and I had to rebuild the thing in the sand. We literally washed cylinder walls out with beer. As a Marine that had plenty of beer.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I just didn't like them. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around them. And this is stuff that I've never told anybody, right?
Yeah.
But people close to me know this. Like one of my longtime employees who just retired earlier this year, the day he retired, he's like, "You didn't even used to like these engines." I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. I didn't." But I think that goes back to that saying that my dad said, where nothing ever stays the same, right? Everything's constantly changing. And the only thing that stays the same is everything constantly changes. And I've went through many seasons, of these changes as I've worked with different engines and tried different combinations. But that's basically the story. An 8-year-old kid trades a lawnmower for a Volkswagen. And that's what started all of this.
Now, you and I know from my history with you that you originally, back when I think I bought my first motor from you, might have been 2002, 2001. And it was that 2270 motor that I had in the Bull Run bus. And with my understanding of your history is you went into the military and you got some formal engine, that's where you kind of got your rigidity to how you build stuff. Is that right?
Well, so that's where I got the discipline, right? So when I was a kid, I was a teenager working in this chicken house, right? So let's step back to when I was 14. My mom passed away when I was 13. She had lung cancer, and I became my dad's project. He worked in a prison after he retired from the bank. Kind of a long story. He worked in a prison so he could get insurance for the family. And he didn't want me to end up in prison. He's like, "I see 2,000 inmates every day. They're all under the age of 25. You're not going to jail," right? So, and he was just a hardcore guy. He was a Korean vet and very hardcore. And so when I came home from high school on my first day of my senior year, he sits me down and he says, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He's like, "I'm the one asking the questions here, not you. What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "This week or next week or what?" "No, what are you going to do with your life? You're starting this is your first day of your senior year." When he was that old, he was already out of the house. He had done all kinds of crazy stuff and he was ready to get drafted. So what are you going to do? And I said, I don't really know. Well, I've been working at a local import shop since the time I was 13, and I was working there to get money for parts. I don't think I ever made a paycheck. I just traded my labor for parts that I could use at home. And he's like, "Well, I'll tell you one thing you're not going to do. You're not going to be in this house. And you're going to be, kind of mooching off me. You're going to be on your own just like I was." And I said, "Okay, well, I guess I'll join the military." And he's like, "Okay, well, what branch are you going to go into?" I was like, "I don't know. I talked to the Marine Corps recruiter a couple of weeks ago." He said, "You can't do that." And I said, "What are you talking about? You'll never make it."
Really?
Well, he understood. Now, my dad was worse than any drill instructor on the face of this planet. When I left home and I went to the Marine Corps, my life actually got easier. And anybody that knew my dad will tell you that. But it took me probably 20 years after that to realize why he did what he did. And the discipline and the things that are instilled in me today, the work ethic especially, came from that. I mean, I would literally get off the school bus when I was a kid, and we still had we had a hobby farm, but we sold stuff to people. And I would get off the school bus, and in the field, I would walk maybe 75 yards off the school bus. There was three things. There was a gallon jar, a gallon, like a big mason jar, like a pickle jar with ice water in it.
Yeah.
There was work clothes in it, and there was some sort of snack. I would change my clothes in the field, and I would go to work, and I would work until dark. And that's just the way life was. So, and I was expected to do that. And a lot of kids were at that time, but that was also a time of change when people wanted their kids to kind of grow up a little bit different than they did and kind of have things that they didn't have. But that was not in the vocabulary of my family. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so that night that I graduated, right? So I told him, I was like, I think I can do this. I went to MEPS, I signed up. I was in the delayed entry program to be a Marine. I was actually given some sort of aviation job. They just tell you can have an aviation specialty. They won't tell you what that is. That comes at a later date. But the problem was that I literally had to leave the night that I graduated from high school to be in the cycle early enough to get an aviation job because of when the classes were and the training happened.
Right.
And you had to go into the fleet at a certain time. So I told him, I was like, I'm going. So that week before I graduated, recruiters like, I'll be in the parking lot and I'll take you straight to the airport in Athens, Georgia, which is about an hour away. He's like, you can catch a regional jet, fly to Savannah. You'll get there. You'll kind of rendezvous with some guys coming in from some other flights, and then you'll end up going on a bus to Paris Island. And I'm like, well, my dad says I can't do it, so I've got to try. So I got my diploma, got in the car with the recruiter, and I ended up at Paris Island. I was at Paris Island by like 1:30, 2 o'clock that morning. I mean, I left at 8 o'clock that night, and I was there.
Crazy.
And so I became a helicopter mechanic on the CH-46, which is a twin tandem rotor helicopter, has two T-58 GE-16 turboshaft engines in it, or turbine engines, if you will. And so I went in as this kid that could work on anything. Like I literally had learned that I was given a gift from God of a mechanical aptitude for pretty much working on anything from tractors to helicopters and Volkswagens, anything in between. I could pick it up and I could do it. If you were trying to formally teach me how to do it, you were pretty much wasting your time. But if you gave me enough rope, I would hang myself, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it until I get in trouble, and then I'm going to bail myself out.
Right.
So when I was a kid, my shop was a disaster. I mean, it was a chicken house of all things, right? I mean, literally. And I'm building engines on a table, and there's pigs 20 feet away, literally.
Yeah.
But in Appalachia in that time period, that wasn't an odd thing, right?
Yeah.
There's still some places around here today where you can go see things like that happen. Boaters hanging out of trees, people working on stuff in their yards. I mean, that's just the way that it kind of still is here when you get way back in the woods, where normal population is yet to go. So the main thing that I learned very quickly was attention to detail and discipline. And that's something that I didn't have any of. Now, I had great work ethic, but I didn't have any discipline. Like, my shop was a complete disaster. I literally had a pile of tools. Like, I didn't have a toolbox. Well, I had one, but nothing ever stayed in it. It was just a pile of tools on the floor, but I knew where everything was.
Yeah.
And so that's what the military gave me, was that. But the big thing that the Marine Corps gave me was orders to Southern California.
Yeah.
And I remember flying into John Wayne Airport. Now, keep in mind, I'd never been in the big city. Like, I went to Atlanta a few times when my dad was in the hospital. Other than that, I had never been to a big city at all. So I get orders to my second school, and it's in Irvine, right there at Marine Corps Air Station Tustin, which is, right down the road from L.A., right off the 5 freeway. So I come in, and I remember seeing all the helicopters because the base was only a couple of miles from the airport there, John Wayne Airport in Irvine. And I remember seeing all these helicopters. I'm like, man, I'm going to be working on that? This is crazy. So I land. It was culture shock. I may as well be a Crocodile Dundee.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and then I the first night I was there, I went to a nightclub. I'd never been to a nightclub before. It was like a whole complete, big culture shock.
Sure.
And then, but what was most important is Remco was less than 2 miles away off Dyer Road.
Yeah.
And I used to call those guys all the time from Georgia. I mean, I sent machine work to them. So I go down there and I walk in, and Todd ran the desk there at the time. And I was like, man, I've called you guys before. I'm stationed here now. Well, I started buying Volkswagens out there. And I had, in the barracks parking lot, I had all kinds of space, right? But you weren't supposed to work on cars in the barracks. So the story gets really crazy because I ended up building an engine in my barracks room. Like every day at lunch, I would go up to Remco on Dyer Road. I would drop something off. Then I would jump on the 55 freeway, go to Costa Mesa, and go to Kimco. So Danny Deacon and Ron Da Silva, a lot of guys I still talk to today, they were my coaches. They're a few years older than me. They were my coaches when I got to Southern California.
Right.
And they would do me favors. They would teach me stuff. I never knew what rocker arm geometry was. Ron taught me what rocker arm geometry was. I had no idea. I was an 18-year-old kid at this time still. 19 by the time I got there. So he taught me that, and Kimco was awesome because they had all these technical directives. Like when you bought parts from them, they gave you a sheet of paper. This is how you rebuild a front axle beam. This is how you do this. This is how you do rocker arm geometry. And today I still have a binder that has all those things in it today. I just found it maybe 2 weeks ago. So that was the discipline and that was the experience. So I'd go to up to the Pomona swap meet. I would build engines on my barracks room. I would take them to Pomona in a U-Haul truck once a month or whatever, once every 2 months if I had to get things with the Marine Corps I had to do, and I would sell them. And sometimes I would make $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 in a weekend.
Wow.
And I didn't have any bills because I lived on the base. So I worked on helicopters during the day. Sometimes I would crew at night or whatever, but then I had a lot of time off, and I was building engines in the barracks room. And but of course I had the military discipline driving all that, and I had the work ethic, so I didn't sleep very much. And then I started getting into some Type 4s out there. So still today, a unit that I was with, HMM 163. Today they fly the Osprey. Back then it was the CH-46. Mm-hmm. One of the first times that I had a positive experience with the Type 4, and this is where the Type 4 starts coming in, because keep in mind, I was doing some Type 4 stuff, but almost all of this was Type 1 at this time. And because I was right there in the mecca of all of it, within 5 miles of everybody. Within 10 miles, I could go all the way to FAT, I could go to Gene Berg's, all those places were within a 10-mile radius of where I was. And I would do that at lunch every day. So, and I met a lot of people. And, the Type 4, the first time I really built one where I had to do a good job is somebody in our unit, HMM 163, had one, and they donated it as a squadron bus. So in these helicopter squadrons, a lot of them would have an old Cadillac or something, but we had this Volkswagen bus. And since it was shaped kind of like one of our helicopters, we turned it into a CH-46, right? So the gear shifter was a cyclic stick out of a CH-46. The avionics guys ripped all the wiring out, replaced everything. We put a gyro in the thing. We did all kinds of stuff to it, but it had a Type 4 motor. Nobody could build it. Nobody could work on it. So I got this thing in pieces. And I was part of phase crew there for a little while, and that's where we took helicopters apart, every 25 hours and did a different inspection, or 100 hours really. It was a phase inspection, and you had different phases that you did. Some of these things would stay in the shop for weeks at a time, and it was a major overhaul of the aircraft. Different systems. Sometimes it was more drive systems. Sometimes it was more avionics. Sometimes it was more hydraulics. But we had a lot of extra time. We worked hard, but we had extra time. So the gunny that was in charge of that phase crew was a Volkswagen guy, and he took on this Volkswagen project, but he didn't know how to put it together. So I ended up building that Type 4 engine and putting it in that bus. Now, today, the squadron still has that bus.
Oh, really?
I did that engine in 1994. So if you go to Google or Grok or whatever you want to go to and type in HMM 163 VW bus, you'll see it. They still use it today. And a guy posted a picture of it on a Volkswagen group maybe about 2 years ago, and I typed out a story about the history of that bus because I built that Type 4 in 94.
Really?
And that was one of the first times, and so since I was doing it, as a Marine for a Marine project, I really had to do a good job. So I went up to Remco, and they did all the machine work on it, went to Chemco and got a bunch of parts, and I put it together. And as far as I know, it's been together since 1994.
Wow. And now with the formal training that you got from the military, I mean, that helped you be a lot more structured and disciplined when building engines and understand the necessity for a clean room and all that kind of stuff and more technical specification. Yeah,
well, the main thing is aviation in general gives you a different discipline. So when you're working on one of those aircraft, it's just sitting on the ground and you're working on it. And then the crazy thing is that your friends, guys that you've trained with, guys that are your brothers, they take care of you, you take care of them. They're going to climb on that aircraft and they're going to fly off into the wild blue yonder.
Right.
And it's your job to keep them alive. So that alone, that pressure, that discipline, it is a rigid and ruthless discipline. And it's a rigid and ruthless standard to excellence. Everything you do as a Marine, you are expected to do with excellence. That's what characterizes a Marine. And what we do, everything that we do is characterized that way. Whether I'm working on a Volkswagen engine, whether I'm planning a field, no matter what I do, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And that's where that came from. So it was formal, but it was military formal. Like the training, you go in and they tell you very quickly when you walk into your first helicopter basic school, when I was in Memphis, Tennessee for that, the BHC course, they said, look, we're going to cover about 12 chapters a day. If you fail a test one time, we're taking you out of this period of instruction and you're going to go be a cook. And in the Marine Corps, cooks work 7 days a week. They work on holidays. Every time anybody else has off, they're always working because Marines have to eat. Right. That's like the worst job that they tell you that you can have. Now, some people enlist to be a cook, which I don't understand. But at the end of the day, they're like, we're going to make you a cook unless you perform. So it's not a class that you could walk into and just barely put out and barely learn. No, you have to understand this stuff. And some people had a little tougher time than others because they didn't have the mechanical background I had. Now, they may have had a strong mechanical aptitude because the ASVAB test tells the military, hey, this person's got a strong, inherent mechanical mind. But a lot of these guys hadn't worked on anything, and so they struggled because they'd never picked up a wrench. They were born with a mechanical aptitude, but they'd never picked up a wrench. On my side, it was a different story. And all I had done was work on stuff. That's all I wanted to do was build and create and work on stuff. I wanted to be in the shop. If my eyes were open, I wanted to be in the shop. I was worthless in school. And they learned it pretty quickly because they're like, look, we don't know what your problem is. We're going to put you in special ed classes because, everything we give you, you memorize it. You could take a test exceptionally well, but you just don't care. I was like, you're pretty much right. So I was in special ed classes because they didn't know what to do with me. So I had 5 or 6 classes a day that were shop classes, but these other people didn't have that. So I found myself having to help a lot of other people kind of get through some of this. And as a Marine, that's what we do. We help each other. And still today, it's the biggest brotherhood there is. We still help each other today. People that I was in with, 30 years ago, I helped a guy out 2 weeks ago that I was in a unit with. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that military formal education is a much different thing than going to any school because you're forced to perform. Yeah. Whether it's saying you're going to do 200 push-ups because you don't know how to name that part. And that's what they would do. What's this part? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you don't know it instantly, that's 50 push-ups or whatever. That's just the way that you learn.
Mm-hmm. Now, So you're building you're back in, so how long are you in the military for? What's your total time you're in the military?
I did 4 years.
So you come back to Georgia, you come back to the farm where, and is your impression like, I'm just gonna get back into doing what I was doing. I've got this better training now. Now I'm going to come back and just go back into building motors. I mean, what was your plan at that point?
So I came home with $95,000 in $100 bills.
Holy cow.
Because I didn't have any bills, right? I ate in the chow hall. I met a family out there that I'm still close with today. And I actually have the father had a hot rod that he got a little bit after I left there, but I actually own that today because he died of brain cancer a few years ago. But he taught me how to paint cars and all this sort of thing. So I had a place to work on stuff. I didn't have any bills. Sometimes I would go stay with them. Sometimes I would just stay in the barracks. So I saved a lot of money. So yeah, I come home, and my dad was older. My dad was 45 when I was born.
Right.
So, when I came home, he'd had a lot of heart problems and stuff. That's the main reason that I, quote, got out of the military. Mm-hmm. Also, they wanted to put me as a mechanic and possibly a crew chief on the Osprey, and I wanted nothing to do with that, and I still wouldn't want to fly on an Osprey. Because they retired my aircraft. So that was a couple of reasons that I got out. Plus, I was done with California. I just couldn't take it anymore. So I come home, and I have a whole U-Haul truck. It was actually a Penske truck, and I was 9,000 pounds overweight.
Wow.
And this truck, I mean, it was a brand new truck, had something like 400 miles on it when I picked it up. By the time I turned it in, it was worn out. It got so hot coming across through the high desert and all that on I-40 in the middle of the hot summer that the exhaust system melted. The muffler was hanging at a 90-degree angle and was dragging the ground. I had to stop and bend the tip of the muffler because it was dragging the ground. That's how hot this thing got. It was that overloaded.
Yeah.
So I get home, and I get there like midnight or something, and my dad comes out again. What are you going to do? Well, we had a small rental house that we'd been renting out. It was the farmhouse. And my dad had told the people that were living in there that they were going to have to leave because I was going to move in there. And it was literally 50 yards from the shop. So I'm moving my stuff in, and, my dad's like, all right, I got to have my rent money. Where's my rent money? I pay him the rent money, and he's being just as hardcore on me then as he was before I went in the military. And he said, so what are you going to do? He's like, I see you brought all this junk home with you. What are you going to do? I said, well, look, I've been out in California. I've met a lot of people. I've got a big network of people that I've met. I've got people that say they'll buy engines from me. There's a couple of guys that restored cars in their garages and stuff. They're like, I want you to build engines for me. I met them at Pomona. I said, I'm going to sell engines to these guys. And I said, there's this thing called the internet. Yeah. And he goes, he says, is that the WWW thing? And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, I've been hearing about that on the radio, because this is like 1997.
Yeah.
And so I tell him, yeah. I said, and I believe that I can sell engines to people all over the world using that. He says, and I remember this like yesterday. We're standing at the loading dock. We had a loading dock there at the front of one of these buildings. And he says, you mean to tell me that there's somebody on the other side of the world that's going to buy a Volkswagen motor from a kid working in a chicken house in Georgia? I said, they might not do that next week, but at some point I think they will. He says that'll never work. That'll never work.
Right.
So for a little while, I went back to work at the import shop that I had been at before I went in the Marine Corps, again, to kind of just get my feet wet, get a hookup for parts again, because this was pre-internet time. You couldn't buy parts online, and you had to have a legit business to be able to buy parts wholesale. And I needed a little bit of a bridge to get all this stuff connected. So I went back to work there for just a few months, and then that's when I was like, okay, I'm jumping off the deep end of this. So I started building stuff. I built a website and started building stuff, and the work just came in. And during that time, my roommate, when I was in the Marine Corps with, he was a Volkswagen guy. He was also from Georgia, but he was all about the Type 4. Now, keep in mind, I was still like, man, I just don't like these things that much.
Right.
So he he decided that he wanted to do a down the middle conversion. And so he shows me this, and I'd never even looked into it. And so he shows me this, and he's like, I'm going to buy one of these, because he got out of the Marine Corps a few months after me, and he came to be my roommate and to be my employee. So that was a plan that we had made when we were still in the Marine Corps. So he does that, and he buys a DTM from Joe, and I see how it goes on, and he puts this thing in a 65 Beetle, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing, right? Maybe I've been wrong about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So he did that, and then I started doing that. And then I started selling those engines all over the world, very quickly all over the world. And luckily, I knew enough about them that I could build them. In the beginning, they were all smaller 2056s, stuff that was pretty much stock and easy to build. But then the 2270 was the first thing that I really got into, hot and heavy. Mm-hmm. And so about a year or so into it, my dad was like, I hadn't failed yet. And I went to him and I said, look, my phone is ringing way too much. I need somebody to answer it. Will you answer the phones? And he goes, yeah, how much are you going to pay me? So we came up with a price, and he's like, I'm only working for cash. I'm like, okay. So he starts answering the phone. Not too long into it, he answers the phone from a guy in Singapore that was calling to order an engine. And then he starts talking to people in Australia. And after not too long, I'd proved him wrong. But really, at the end of the day, he had told me that I couldn't do it, knowing that was the only way to truly motivate me, right? Yeah. If he told me that I couldn't climb a wall, I'm going to kill myself to crawl up that wall, just because of the relationship that we had. Right. So I think the whole time he knew I could do it. He knew it was going to work, but he had to throw that element in there to give me extra inspiration. So, but that's when I really got into the Type 4. So it was kind of a mistake. It was kind of like I happened upon it. And then when I started into it, this is late 97, early 98, when I really got into that stuff, and it literally exploded. There was a huge void in the market at that time. Right. The only people doing it was Mark Stevens High Performance. That was the only place doing Type 4s, and that was their big thing. And in the very beginning, I didn't do cylinder head work, and I actually bought some heads from them, and they're still going on engines today.
And so the part of the thing with, you've gone through a lot of evolutions with the Type 4, but in the beginning, right? I mean, like my motor, it has a DPR crank. It's got the Keith Black 96 millimeter pistons, that first 2270 that I got from you. And when you were building that back in those days, you were using the Sharp built fan shrouds. And it was funny. I tell the story all the time. I bought my original motor, I think it was $8,500. And my friends were just like, you're crazy. That's too much money for an engine. And it's like, and I remember the whole way, I happened to be I was at the VW Classic or something. And I ran into a guy that I kind of chatted with on the Samba for a minute. He had a panel bus over there on 16-inch alloys. And he goes, I said, yeah. He's like, what motor are you going to build for it? And I just said, I don't know, probably a 2276, a VW motor, whatever. He goes, why would you do that? Why don't you build a Type 4? And he's like, hey, go check out this guy, Jake Raby, and this whole thing. And once I saw, the whole Type 4 thing, it just made sense to me, right? Like you could build a 2-liter using 90% factory German parts and have the larger displacement starting out and be a lot more reliable and dependable and not have to worry about low quality aftermarket parts and all this stuff. And then kind of went down that rabbit hole. And, the testament to that motor, that 2270 motor is, that motor, we just recently split it and tore it down just to freshen it up. It didn't need it, but, it had, obviously the motor's been on the road for 20 years. I don't drive it easy. It's been, I've had it down the drag strip 5 or 6 times, running a low 16-second pass and a full bus with the stereo system and everything in it. I've driven that thing. On the TV show we drove Bull Run. We had 3,000 miles in 3 weeks is what we did, and no issues have I ever. I mean, that's been like the most reliable. That's the one motor I've had for the longest time. It's been reliable, dependable. So in the face of everybody that told me I was crazy buying an $8,000 turnkey engine, It's just that motor. And then from that day on, I've been a believer. The next car I did, the 2615 and the Type 34 car Magia that I built, that I had, and that motor turned into, it had SDS EFI on it. And then after a while, I ended up switching it to a Motec EFI on it, which really I sold that car back in 2017. It's still to this day, the car starts and runs no issues. But there's been a lot of evolution since you've got involved in the Type 4 scene, right? With what you were first doing. Walk us through kind of the steps of what you're like 20 years ago, you were building a 2270 motor, and how much has that in itself changed to this day with what you built then to what you build now. And then obviously there's the big motors and all that stuff, the performance stuff, but where with my engine originally, that 2270, what's changed in how you build that same motor to this day?
Well, I really don't even build a 2270 anymore. And I'm going to tell you a few reasons why. And evolution is one of the biggest reasons for that. But before I do that, I just want to say that, back in the day, about the time that you purchased that engine from me, there was a huge war that was Type 1 versus Type 4, right? and but that was hard for me because I love Type 1s, but I also saw the niche in the Type 4, and I love the fact that I was not strapped down to the industry. I love the fact that all the parts were not going to China. And that was a big transitional time back in the late 90s, right? I mean, I remember when the first aluminum Type 1 cases first came out, right? Yeah. That was another big transition in the Volkswagen world. But what I loved is I could be that guy that marched to the beat of my own drum. I did not have to buy anything from industry leaders at the time. I could literally do things on my own, and I could build things the way I wanted to build them, and I could be more creative with what I built than I would be if I was following industry leaders and I was just bolting things together like everybody else was bolting things together. That's what I like. But that also caused some controversy because people didn't like that I marched to the beat of my own drum. I was already outside of California. I was already outside the world of the industry. And that was controversial alone, just because I wasn't part of that clique. You know what I mean? And I'm still not.
Absolutely.
So now let's get on the 2270. Now, the reason I loved that engine, and I still do love it, it's just not as viable today. And the reason for that is because of the capabilities that I currently have and the role that I have played at LN Engineering since 2000, or really since 1999, when two college kids came to me with an idea of having Nikasil plated aluminum cylinders for Volkswagen engines that had never existed before, because that was Porsche technology. And I told them that their college project needed to be a business, and I would be their first customer. And they created a business, and I was their first customer, and I've been the technical director at that company for the past few years now as a kind of a tertiary job, if you will. And that's the reason why the 2270 kind of came and went over time. Because what I learned very early on, and I even learned this in the desert, building Type 4s for the desert when I was in California, cast iron cylinders above 96 millimeter, everybody used them. And I mean, Fat had extraordinary success running the Baja 1000 and doing all kinds of desert stuff with them. I couldn't make them work. I just couldn't. They wouldn't stay straight. I couldn't get the cylinders to seal. I just couldn't make it work. The biggest that I found that was reliable and worked was a 96 millimeter. With that, I could take an original 93 or 94 millimeter Volkswagen cylinder, not aftermarket. I could put it in the hone. I could open that thing up to 96, and I could use those Keith Black pistons or JE pistons with it, with my ring packs that I came up with, and I could couple that to a DPR crank that had usually a Type 1 rod journal or maybe a 2-inch Chevy, according to what had good bearings at the time, and put that with like a 5.325 or a 5.4 rod, and with a 22 millimeter pin. And I could build a good combination that with the right cam and the right heads would make 175 to 180 horsepower every day, all day long. But in the beginning, the engines that I thought were 175 horsepower, when I got my first dyno in 2000, I learned were really 135.
Right.
And I've still got that dyno. I've got two engine dynos and a chassis dyno, and I've still got the old Stuska, and I've updated it, but I've still kept it manually controlled because that's what I've been doing for 26 years now. But at the end of the day, what I liked about that combination is that the cylinders would stay straight. Since you only went 2 millimeters or so overboard from factory, you didn't have problems with combustion chamber leaks at the cylinder heads. Right. The engine still ran cool. It would run cool in a big bus. And then we could talk about DTM versus your sharp built. But, your sharp built's a rare thing for me because I haven't built an engine with a 911 cooling fan in the vertical position since 2002.
Yeah.
Yours is probably one of the last ones that I did because that's when I purchased the rights to the DTM from Joe's family after he passed away. And that's when I started building those cooling systems, and I picked up the development where Joe left off. And people don't know it, but Joe actually made a 911 cooling system, and I still had the molds for that. We just never did anything with it.
Yeah. So so I actually have one of the DTMs, one of the original DTMs, because I picked up a DTM back when it was between both engines that you did for me. I still have it. Haven't put it on a car yet. And I've got a couple Type 4s, and I think in my head one day I'm going to get some time and I'm going to rebuild a couple Type 4s here in my garage just to have some extra motors. But the DTM, that's one of the things that was about you, right? Like when you found something that was new and worked better, you continued to try to develop it, and you weren't afraid to share that information online. Now, for some of the people that are listening that may not understand the primary differences between a Type 4, what are the top 5 differences that make a Type 4 better than a Type 1 for longevity, more torque, more reliability, and more durability?
Well, those are easy because they make sense. So number one is the engine started at a displacement of 1,700 cc's at the very beginning when the Type 1 ended at 16. So right from the get-go, the smallest Type 4 was designed to be bigger than the biggest Type 1. That is undeniable. People can argue facts all day long, but that's just the facts. Number two, I like the fact that the flywheel bolts on with 5 bolts instead of a gland nut. Okay, mm-hmm. That came from the 911 world. Okay, the third one, and what I think is actually probably the biggest one, is that the engine has 26% more cooling surface area than a Type 1. Because so really? You can take the same given amount of air, and that air does 26% more cooling than it would on a Type 1. So that's why the engines, when they are put in the proper combination with a proper exhaust, and exhaust is everything to a Type 4, everything. It means more than any other component. But when you put those things together, you can have an engine that I built these engines larger than 3 liters that would run cooler than a stock Type 1 with a DTM. And the reason for that is because the engine is not having to work. It's creating so much power at such a low RPM, right in the middle of the drivability, right in the middle of the RPM range where it really matters, between 2,500 and 4,500 RPM. If you design the engine to be super efficient in that period, then it's going to run so cool, even with a Type 1 cooling fan, because it has all that surface area. And the exhaust ports are under the cylinder heads. That's another key thing. So people don't pay attention to it. Side exits are common on the Type 1 and common on the 356. Mm-hmm. When Porsche started making real power, starting with the 4-cam Carrera in the mid-1950s, they put those exhaust ports on the bottom, and they did that for a reason. Every air-cooled 911, exhaust ports are on the bottom for a reason, all the way to the end of production with 993, all the way through. And you can get more cooling around those exhaust ports. You can saturate the exhaust port area, which is the hottest part of the head, with cooling fans. So that the cooling fan capability for me, that's the third thing, and I think it's the most important because it opens every other door. Because the biggest enemy that the Type 4 has is heat. Any air-cooled engine, any engine, the biggest enemy is heat.
Right.
If you can keep it cool, the capabilities and the doors are open for everything if it just stays cool, because that is the key between keeping it cool and keeping it from thermally overloading. And people don't understand the difference between an engine being hot and an engine being thermally overloaded and an engine being heat soaked. So with me, what I learned early with Type 1s, they were easy to heat soak because the exhaust ports were on the side. A lot of times the engines did not have enough cooling capability, meaning that the engine did not inherently cool. No matter what cooling fan you put on it, no matter what shroud you put on it, you still lack the cooling capability. There's some heads out there that have more fins than others. There's some heads that have fins that are more positioned in a critical area than others in the Type 1 world. And some of those kind of come in play, but drag racers never understand that because they don't care. But unfortunately, in the Type 1 world, most of the development is done for drag racing. It's not done for street driving. In my world, almost everything was developed for street driving, for people who wanted to drive the car with double or triple power, whatever the case may be, and drive it every day in every climbing place. That's I've had engines go all the way from Amsterdam to Beijing in a bus. That's a hell of a trip, loaded down from Amsterdam to Beijing. And then that same one went from the northern tip of Africa all the way to the south. That was another trip that they did in that bus.
Was this like
didn't even freshen the engine up?
Like an off-road bus?
No, it was a group of guys that would go to the Olympics no matter where they were, and they were from Holland, and they still do this today, I think. But they painted all their vehicles orange, and the first time I've ever followed them was when they did Amsterdam to Beijing with one of my engines. But that's what they did, and it was mostly Volkswagens. There was a few other cars in there, but there was Beetles, buses, Gias, and they would paint these things orange. And I still got a book they sent me from one of those trips. But that's a hell of a trip, But it would be hard pressed to do that with a Type 1 engine, considering they were operating at ambient temperatures of 120 degrees, every day. I mean, I think the lows at night were like 90, Fahrenheit. So that's the cooling thing, I think, is number 3. Number 4 with the Type 4, the big advantage that it has is that the engine is actually smaller in 2 out of 3 dimensions. People don't understand that. They think that it's a bigger engine, it's going to be bigger. It's not. In 2 out of 3 dimensions, one being the width, the engine is actually more narrow between the intake manifolds than a stock 1600 Type 1. About 1 5/8 inches, actually, according to what intake manifolds you use between the carburetors.
Interesting.
So the only dimension that's larger is the dimension, what I call the Z dimension, from the bell housing to the crank pulley. And that dimension is about 1 inch. So that's why when you put a Type 4 into a Beetle, you have to have different tinware and stuff that you kind of have to fabricate yourself, or we've actually made tinware over years that was water jet cut. But that dimension is the only one that's actually larger than the other 2 dimensions. So I think that's an important thing. I think it's an advantage that it has, because in some cases it's easier to work on a Type 4 in a Type 1 engine bay than it is a Type 1 in a Type 1 engine bay.
Now there's been a lot, obviously I know a lot of guys in the race world and stuff over here, and some of the guys I talk to that build some of the off-road Type 4 motors. They say the biggest drawback to the Type 4 for building big power, right? And I think these guys are mostly focused on racing, right? Is the head design and the stud spacing and how small the cylinder, the meat on the cylinder head is on the bottom and top side, where normally they would 5th and 6th stud the cylinder heads. What is your experience with that? And I guess it may or may not be relevant, because the majority of stuff that you build is for the street, right? And they're going to be average compression. And is there a difference in compression you can run on a Type 1 versus a Type 4? Can you run higher compression on Type 4 than you can on a Type 1?
Well, I mean, I don't think the compression ratio is really a player in that. The Type 4 had problems when it was a new engine with valve seats. Some of the heads crack, like the 2-liter 914 heads are really bad about cracking. Those heads were also the best as far as port flow characteristics from the factory. I mean, that's 180 CFM intake port right out of the gate with a 42 millimeter intake valve. Show me a Type 1 that's ever been close to that with any factory head. I really think that the weaknesses the Type 4 has are exacerbated and really show up when you couple those really large cast iron cylinders to the engines. Because starting in 2000, when Nickeys became a thing with LN Engineering, that is when the transformation truly occurred. Mm-hmm. That is when I started building engines with bigger bores almost all the time. And that's why since 2008, I haven't built an engine really with a 96 millimeter cylinder, because I've used Nickeys on everything, because they are a billet aluminum cylinder and they have Nickesil plating, and just like a 911 engine. All right. So it goes back to most all the air-cooled 911s, except for the earliest ones, had Nickesil cylinders that were aluminum. Some engines like the 911T had a biral cylinder or whatever. Those don't really count. But any of the higher horsepower engines all the way through the 993 had that technology. So I think that the problems people have is because they're tied into the lasso of the industry. So if you just want to buy parts from normal places and you want to buy parts at a decent cheap Volkswagen type rate, then you're going to face some challenges with these engines, and you're going to have problems because of how big the bore is, and you're going to think that those problems are because the case is weak or because the heads are weak. At the end of the day, it's not either one of those two. What you're seeing is a differential and expansion between these materials, and you get to a breaking point.
Right.
So when I build one of these engines today, it's all aluminum, meaning that we don't have this other material, a dissimilar material being cast iron in the mix. Okay.
Right,
so
right.
when you have an aluminum case and you have a cast iron cylinder head, and then you have cast iron cylinder, and you have an aluminum cylinder head, you have things expanding at different rates at different temperatures. So when you have an engine that gets hot, the first thing it wants to do, if you have a cast iron cylinder, that cylinder doesn't move very much when it gets hot, right? When I've done testing with this, that cylinder might only move a couple thousandths at 400 degrees.
Yeah.
When I test the aluminum cylinder on that engine, the aluminum cylinder might move 10 or 12 thousandths according in length, let's say, not on diameter, but in length. So when you start having a cylinder, it doesn't really grow, and you have a cylinder head that's getting hot and it's expanding. You have a crankcase that's getting hot and it's expanding. The cylinder is not really moving. Well, then it starts to decrease the clamping pressure between the cylinder and the head. And that might make you think that you've got a cylinder head problem, because that's where you're seeing the symptom. You're seeing the head leak. Like, this head's folding up. This head's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's not staying straight. The head is weak. No, the problem isn't that the head is weak. The problem is that you have dissimilar expansion factors going on at the same time, and something has got to be the weak link. So the problem is that you have these dissimilar materials, and it's showing a symptom that's not really the problem. So when we started doing the aluminum, all of a sudden, all those problems went away. I've got engines with 107 millimeter bore sizes. One of those has boost on it. So with that, I think that the cylinder head gets a lot of blame when it really shouldn't. And I will also say that the new aftermarket heads, I don't remember what heads I put on your engine. AMC. They might have been originals.
They're AMC
okay,
heads.
So that, and those were good heads, and they still are today. Other companies have jumped in to make those cylinder heads, and all of the aftermarket cylinder heads have been better as far as stiffness and rigidity goes than the original heads were. I would see problems show up with the original heads that we didn't see with the AMCs, even when you had the cast iron cylinders. So when I start seeing big bores, I'm talking about anything over 98 millimeter. That's where we start to see problems come into play when you throw that cast iron cylinder, I usually call them cast iron clunkers, in the mix. and you start having cylinder head leaks, you start having to reduce compression ratio as a band-aid, you start having to limit cylinder pressures as a band-aid, and things like that. But if you have the same expansion coefficient going on across the entire engine, and you've got good even cooling, like with a DTM or like this OTT system, the OTT system that I've been using, that I've come up with, then you just don't have these problems. And I mean, that is totally proven by the fact that you put that engine over 20 years ago in one of the heaviest applications you could put it into. It's going to be more apt to thermally overload that engine and going to be more apt to have heat soak. And you've ran it in the desert. Look at where you live, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you've done all this stuff with it, and it stayed alive to the point that you were able to electively and preventatively go into it and freshen it up. How many times have you heard that? I mean, seriously, how many times have you ever heard? How many times has anybody listening to this been able to hear somebody at a car show or something say, I've been driving this car for 20 years and I took the engine out to electively rebuild it? Yeah. In the Volkswagen world, that don't happen.
No,
so
it
the opposition, the opposition can say, they could have said all they wanted to 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They can say what they want to today. But you can't argue with the fact that you've done what you've done with that bus. You put it in this operating environment that is the most harsh, not really on the planet, but it's certainly the most harsh in this country.
Wow.
And you've done all of these things with it.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you just the drive. I tell people a lot of times we talk about, everyone talks about, I drive my car everywhere or whatever. And I say, well, yeah, but in the dead of summer to drive from here to LA, you've got Baker grade to contend with, which is like a 7,000 foot climb. It's a huge grade. And there's two of them between here to California. And that bus has been, I mean, I remember, a lot of times because I'll tow my car there on a trailer because there's no sense in getting to the show and I'm exhausted from the drive. But we have driven plenty of times. We'll go to buses by the bridge and we'll go from Vegas to LA and we've got two huge grades to climb. And my bus in our local area has set the standard for like, this is how you got, if you've got a Type 4, you're getting over that hill, no problem. You're going to push through that thing. And I've had, an immense amount of success. And even when we were doing bull run, I mean, we were going through New Mexico, which is like, there was one grade there that was like, I think we got up to like 10,000 feet. And, it's been reliable, dependable, the same 44 carburetors that have been on there. I think, for the most part, it's just been something that was my go-to car. Like if I want something that's reliable and know it's going to make it, it's like I hop in that thing. I'll check the oil and I hit the road. Like valves stay in adjustment for long periods of time. It hardly, it's been bulletproof reliable for me forever. And that's why I've just been sold on Type 4s since that. I've got a couple other Type 4s. I remember there was a guy, Steve's Type 4 parts that was selling parts.
Oh yeah.
And
oh God.
When I was building the Ghia, I originally bought one of those long blocks. And then I was like, well, I'm building this Ghia on a budget. And then I ended up just saying, you know what, Jake, let's just do the 2615 motor. I think it was 2615 or 2650. The one had the Nickies, it had everything on it. And then, sold that car. I had that motor sitting forever. And then when I tore it down, it was like, it was all built with used parts and everything was all, but I got what I paid for, right? I think I paid like $3,500 for the long block or something like that, and ended up using it as a core for something else down the road. But it's like throughout all this technology, when I bought the first Moto 26, the 2270 to the 2615, which had the Nickies, it had the coatings, it had all that kind of stuff. You've been constantly trying to push as much evolution as you can on design and development that's 50 years old, and what have you seen as far as the most improvements with respect to aftermarket? Obviously the Nickies was a game changer, right? That changed everything with respect to displacement, reliability, and keeping them together longer for better. How have you seen the coatings? Because I know in the beginning, my first motor was no coatings. Second motor started doing coatings. And how has that evolution of that type of technology affected like air-cooled development in the world you're in?
Well, it's changed everything, and then everything's changed again. So something that people that go to the Fourth Dimension group on Facebook have been able to see. Fourth Dimension Type 4 group is a group I started a few years ago, and it's kind of exploded. And I never even really tried to get it to explode. But at any rate, if you're there, you've seen that I've been doing other things with cylinder technology. So and a lot of this experience comes from the things that I have done outside of the air-cooled world. And I've been able to – it's kind of funny because in the beginning of me doing water-cooled Porsche engine development, all the air-cooled stuff that I was doing was paying for that development. And then now all the water-cooled stuff has shed light and is basically paying for air-cooled development. So I've kind of gone full circle because of all the things I've been able to do for, more modern Porsche engines, where I've spent about 15 years of my life, the last 15 years, more devoted to that than I was the air-cooled stuff. I'm still doing air-cooled stuff, just not as much. Now the demand for the air-cooled stuff is probably the greatest I have seen in the last 20 years. I've got more of those engines on the books than I've had in the last 20 years, literally.
Wow.
So, but what I'm seeing is that now I'm taking the things that I learned from these more modern engines, and I'm able to retrospectively combine those things with the old technology, which is actually 60 years old now in the Type 4.
Yeah.
And I'm able to recreate things, and I'm able to take this more modern approach and change things out because, in the water cooled world, about the least horsepower I build is 400, right?
Yeah.
With these things. And I mean, some of them are 500. Boosted, my record with one boosted was just over 1,000 at the wheels.
Really?
But you learn a lot of different things, and in those engines, they had a bearing problem called the intermediate shaft bearing, and I was able to learn that was a problem very early on from a good friend of mine, and who's passed away now, Bruce Anderson. He was the tech editor at one of the magazines in the Porsche world, and he came to me and Charles at LN and said, "Look, these bearings are blowing up. I know you guys don't like this water cooled stuff, but you need to do something about this. Nobody's getting into it. I'm getting all these letters. I can't say anything really about it." But it's a problem. So I went and bought a Boxster, took it apart, bought a bunch of core engines, and I invented and patented the fix for that and all the tooling. And we've saved a few 100,000 cars at this point doing that. So through all of that and the patenting procedures and the things that I've learned outside the air-cooled world, now I'm able to bring a lot of that life and use that in the Type 4. So what this is leading to is Nickies, the Nicosil. Okay, so Nickies, I'll explain it for people that don't understand. Nickies is a term that LN coined for a billet aluminum cylinder that is then Nicosil plated. So Nicosil is nickel, silicon, and carbide as a plating. It is not a coating. So plating goes on high temperature, high pressure. Coating goes on low temperature, low pressure. That's kind of just basically the difference between the two.
Right.
And the good thing about Nicosil, Porsche used it for years and years through all the air-cooled engines. We were able to use bore sizes that used Porsche rings. So we did that 2615 for you. That was a 102 millimeter bore size. I literally used 993 RSR piston rings in that. Factory genuine 993 rings. That's the same bore size.
Oh, wow.
So we were able to take the technology Porsche did and literally rob that and reapply it to the Type 4. Volkswagen people didn't like that because it wasn't an industry thing. Right? It wasn't something they understood, and they had to villainize that. They had to villainize me for doing that, and I'm glad they did, because what they should know about a Marine, the more we're pissed off, the better and harder that we fight, and the better and harder that we think. So I want to thank every one of those people who created a bump in the road for me, because they're the ones that created my success. They just don't know it. So at the end of the day, what we're seeing now is Nicosil is going bye-bye. Porsche stopped using it in 98. And the reason they stopped using it, one, was for cost, and two, was for the environment. So, of course, the Germans lead the way with green, and this is a plating process. So it's a very dirty process. It requires a lot of acids. It uses nitric acid. It uses different things, and it is a plating. So, back in the day, every small town had a plating shop, chrome shop, whatever. Try to find one today. You don't find it because it's a hazardous material nightmare, right? So what we're seeing now is that the Nicosil platers in the country are going the way of the dodo because they're tired of fighting all this environmental regulation, and it's making it where they can't make any money. And it obviously makes things expensive for cylinders and all the stuff that we do. So a few years ago, technology came around that's a plasma cylinder spray. And there's a couple of different types of this. One is called Sumobore, that was developed by a company called Orlikon. And then you have PTWA, which is a plasma wire transfer of an arc, okay? And basically they go in, the process is almost like you go in and lay MIG wire into a cylinder, you hit it with 400 amps, you fuse it together, and then you hone that inside of an aluminum cylinder, okay? Wow. And what this does is it allows you to have your cake and eat it too. You're able to have the environmentally friendly side. You don't have all the acids and crap to play with. Two, you're able to have the expansion coefficient of that aluminum cylinder where it grows with the case and it grows with the head. Three, you're able to have a wear surface that has porosity designed into it. Because people don't understand how piston rings seal. The piston ring doesn't seal against the cylinder. It should have a boundary layer of protection there of oil between those two cylinders because the oil, or between the cylinder and the piston rings anyway, because the oil is your gasket, right? People don't realize that. So you look at a honed surface, you're looking at a peak and a valley, and then the difference in between that peak and the valley is where the oil is supposed to kind of live, and that oil is your gasket. That's what seals the ring off, okay? So if you don't have the right amount of oil there, then you don't have good cylinder seal, and that causes wear, it causes blow-by, it causes all kinds of things. So these newer technologies that are literally used, Sumobore and PTWA are used by Porsche today. The Ford Coyote uses PTWA, but Ford kind of did it a cheap way. So it's, for lack of a better term, it's a flame spray. So since 2017, I've been experimenting with that. And I built the first Type 4 in 2018 using that as a test engine. I ran that engine for 69 hours. The biggest test I ran was the engine set at 5,000 RPM on the dyno until the dyno overheated for hours. And then I ended up cracking the case. I actually have never cracked the Type 4 case before, but the center main web actually cracked. And on the Type 4 Fourth Dimension group on Facebook, you'll see all the pictures and videos. I didn't even stop testing. The engine was dry sumped, and I just kept putting more oil in it. I had something down below it to catch the oil as it was pouring out of this thing. I refused to abort the test. I did not want to screw the test up. So his oil's dumping out of it. I'm running it through a screen, and I'm pouring it right back in the other side because I refused to stop the test. And so with that, we did Sumobore, and then now I'm doing PTWA. So the Nicosil is going away because of environmental regulations, and these newer technologies offer more than we're seeing with Nicosil. And the reason for that is because we're able to run much different piston rings, much different surface finishes. It changes everything. And I think that's something that people don't understand in the Volkswagen world. They have their head inside the box so much, and everything that they've always done works so well. They're not constantly challenging themselves because what they're doing works, and they're trying to stay in a certain budget, so they don't experience a lot of this stuff. With me, like, I don't want to do that. Like, if I feel like if I'm in a rhythm with something, like if it's going too well or if I've done it too much, I feel like I'm failing. I want to do it a different way again. I want to constantly throw things at it. So the PTWA, I've actually got 5 sets of test cylinders downstairs right now. And I'm going to be posting some of that stuff on the group here pretty soon because this is history. Nobody's ever done this. And what's very unique about this is we've also been using the Sumobore and PTWA with the Porsche M9X engines and 9 Alpha 1 engines starting, it came out in 97 with a Boxster and then came out with the MA1 engine, 9 Alpha 1 in 2009. We're using this same technology with them. But the interesting part is I originally figured out what piston rings needed to be ran, what cylinder surfaces need to be ran, what clearances needed to be ran using a Type 4. So I literally used a Type 4 engine to develop things for cars that are only maybe 5 years old, you see.
Really?
And I did that because I could tear a Type 4 down in 40 minutes. I literally made the engine with my OT cooling system on the top so I could pop the cylinder tins off the thing. I put Teflon buttons in the wrist pins. I could have the heads off the thing in 20 minutes. I mean, I'm sitting here taking an engine apart that's still so hot you got to have on welding gloves to take the thing apart. And I'm changing out cylinders while the thing's still warm. And I've got it right back together again, and the engine didn't even cool down. You can't do that with a modern Porsche engine. It takes you longer than that just to pop one cylinder head off, you know?
Yeah.
And you got to take the whole block apart to be able to access the rings. So I literally took this 60-year-old engine and used it to create things for cars that are 20 years old up to about 5 years old. Because why use those more complex engines to learn the hard stuff, right? Use a simple engine that we know so well and I've got an indispensable amount of parts for. I don't care if I blow it up or not. Why not use that to do the testing? And that's exactly what I've done and what I continue to do. So.
No, that's. I mean, I think it's pretty impressive the amount of, here we are 20 years later, and you're still putting in a lot of effort into trying to modernize these motors so that we can still stay true to the air cooled game, and just try to develop as much. And I think it's more important, not just performance, but reliability. In these things, because like you're saying, a lot of these guys in the Type 1 world, they know what works on a drag strip on a quarter mile, and they've done so many passes with it, and that equals to so much street driving, but it doesn't, right? Because you're using specific limited fuel that you brought to the track. You've got controlled conditions to some extent, and you're not getting that day in, day out abuse that, I have a Corvair. And the Corvair of a turbo Corvair, and the choke point on that car designed by General Motors is the carburetor, right? Like you drop a brick on the gas pedal, not grenade a turbo air cooled flat six motor, because it's got this baby carburetor on there that just will not allow it to overboost. And with car manufacturers, everything that they do has to be connected to give it to the biggest idiot and have it not blow up. You know what I mean? If they can. And it's interesting.
That carburetor is just a restrictor plate, basically,
right?
Is what they've done. Volkswagen did the same thing. I mean, look at their 28 pick, 30 pick carburetors, even 34. I mean, they're a choke point, every one of them. And they did that because they wanted the intake to have good vacuum. That's one of the main reasons they did it. Plus, it was a governor, for lack of a better term. So,
no, absolutely.
But and then I will also say that today the industry that I'm a part of it's a very small industry. It's not the Volkswagen industry, and it's not the Porsche industry. I'm in between the two of them, working in a big gray area, pretty much on my own. And that's the way that I like it, because I'm sitting in the middle of a 25-acre field. Nobody knows where to find me. Nobody knows how to get to me. I've got a sign on the door that says nobody gets in to see the wizard. But you're here and you don't even know that you're here.
Right.
And that's the way that I like it, because that's my thing. I work odd hours. I work a lot, but I work when I want to. But today I'm going to tell you that the amount of people that want outside the box, and they want creativity, and they want craftsmanship, is higher than it has been in my life in this industry collectively. The people that I'm now dealing with, and the people that I've dealt with for years, they aren't do-it-yourselfers, right?
Right.
But they're also not just check strokers. A lot of these people are also engineers. They're creators. They're craftsmen as well. I mean, one guy that I built several engines for, he restores houses in Beverly Hills. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He does special work for special people, and he does things that you can't buy. That is what I have seen that people want today, because you can't find it. And especially after COVID. So COVID rocked this industry, right? And it actually did more to the Porsche industry for the more modern cars. in a negative manner than it did the Volkswagen stuff, because these Volkswagen companies, they've all been around for years. They've all been doing the same thing. Private equity's played a factor in some of it, but at the end of the day, the Volkswagen industry really hasn't changed that much in the time that I've been in it. It's still the same old song and dance. But the other industries where you're working with more modern cars that have to get driven every day, and people are therefore putting real miles on them, and they're seeing real failures, it has gone very south, right? Even genuine Porsche parts, getting bad stuff out of the box, seeing things made in places where we would not normally see those things being made. And it's been a huge problem, and it's getting bigger. But what this has done, and I've noticed since COVID, is craftsmanship is once again appreciated, and it's not even expected anymore. People today don't expect craftsmanship. They expect everything to be the standard, regular old, mass-produced, I can have it Amazon in a couple of days, generic junk. That's what they have learned to accept, because
Right.
that is society. That is society. So when you come to a guy like me, I don't care about the rest of the world.
Right.
I mean, I don't even watch TV, right? Sometimes people are go, you see what happened in the Middle East? I don't give a damn. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. Politics, I don't care a damn thing about it. I mean, back in the day, I didn't even used to pay attention to who was the president. It didn't matter. It was what it was. I'd vote one time and that was it. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that I'm seeing people today that are coming to me and sometimes buying this engine from me because it's the only thing they can get that is truly handcrafted. Where I send them a sheet, I'm like, okay, let's talk about how you're actually going to drive this thing. Let's talk about where you're going to drive it. Let's talk about the kind of fuel that you have. Let's talk about the way you want it to look. Let's talk about the color of the hardware. Do you want it yellow zinc? And if you do you want it that kind of the rainbow yellow zinc, or do you want it to be yellow zinc as in vintage Porsche yellow zinc? Let's talk about the color of the resin on the cooling system. You want it to be clear or gel coat? You want it to look more like a Porsche engine would? You want to make it look more modern? You want it to be a total Raby engine where I do whatever the hell I want to and make it one-off? And that's what I've seen, and that's what is driving it today. So the people that are coming to me, they want that, and I'm able to give that to them because unlike a lot of people, I was never one to sit behind a desk. I will say there was about a 5-year period when the water-cooled stuff was really blowing up, and I had 15 employees, and we had cars from all over the world. I had cars from Russia, Australia, cars being shipped to me. And I could still have that today if I'll accept the work, but I don't really care about it anymore.
Right.
But there was a time there where I was a business owner, and I hated every minute of it. There was a time there where I might go a month and not pick up a wrench, and I absolutely hated it. But now it's a different story than that, because a few years ago, I went back the other way, and I said, look, I realized that COVID has impacted this industry to a point where it's never going to be the way that it was, from the workers that we're able to get, the things that people want to do to work, the parts we're able to get, which have all gone downhill. The only way I see this thing moving forward is to make it smaller. And that's what I did. So about that time, people started just coming back for the Type 4. But they're almost all 356 and 912 guys. And the reason for that is because those cars are worth real money. And a Type 4 with my parts bolts directly into that car. You don't have to cut it at all. So you can take your original engine out of the car. You can pickle it, put it on the shelf. You can take my engine, slide the whole thing in the car, just the way it comes off my dyno, and they get the same result that you got 20 years later with your bus, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they're really willing to appreciate. Now, it's not all 356 and 912 because I've got 9 engines in front of me now that I'll only take on 10 at a time. I just finished one. I got 9 others here. I'll be selecting another job pretty soon. That's kind of how I do it. And at one time in my life, I had a 30-month backlog. I worked all that away. I'll never do that again. But at that time, I confused, backlog with success and job security. But COVID taught me that job security was actually a liability when engines started costing me more money because they were proposed 30 months down the road, and all the parts went up by 40% in that amount of time. Yeah. But anyway, I'm seeing half of these engines are going into Volkswagens. Ovals, a couple of them are going into buses. But most of these are international purchasers. So people in other countries have always liked the Type 4 more than Americans have.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, there's a big push in, Germany's always been, and it's because of their guidelines, right? They have to use a factory part to put in, so they can just put a factory big bore displacement motor, and it still falls into the category of kind of classifying as a factory type thing. So out of necessity. And I think also the Germans lean towards the way I describe to people Type 1 to Type 4, as I say, they take the Type 1 and they engineered the flaws out of it into the Type 4. And that was the next development of Volkswagen's air-cooled successor to the Type 1 motor, right? Was the Type 4 with the aluminum case, the different head design, the bolt-on flywheel, a lot of those things that we discussed. But, I think, looking at this, and I know you do a lot of technology, so I do got some fire-off questions for you, just because I've always wondered, and I know that with the DTM shroud, right, you went to that for more even-based cooling system. I noticed you did a composite shroud, and I've often wondered to myself, why don't we have composite manifolds and things like that? Does some of that play a part in dispersing the heat off of the cylinder head with like a manifold? Because obviously you don't want your manifold to get hot, but how come no one's making composite intake manifolds for Volkswagens that would make them, I would assume, run more efficiently? Or have you done testing with different materials for intake manifolds?
Well, and this kind of goes into what I've been doing for the past few years, because my goal is now to build my engine 100% in-house. Other than making piston rings, pistons, and valves, my goal is to build this whole thing here. Cooling system, grind my own cams. I mean, I put in a full CNC shop, and I don't have employees running that stuff. Like, what I love about it is I'm able to just yesterday, it was Christmas Day, but I'm still working, right? And my mind never turns off. I had an idea about 2:00 yesterday afternoon. I took that idea after everybody went to sleep, and I drew it up on a piece of paper, and then I put that into CAD, and I 3D printed it. I came in here about an hour before we had the podcast, and I saw what I dreamed up yesterday. And then I start looking at that, and I'm like, okay, now how am I going to work hold this to put it in my 5-axis mill, my Haas UMC? How am I going to hold this, right? And that is currently sitting on my desk. How am I going to make this part? So that is something that is unique to what I do, because as I'm building an engine for a customer, I'm sending this guy pictures of me making his parts, his actual part, and then I'm going to put it on his engine and send him pictures of that, and then he gets to see it perform on the dyno and drive in his car. That's something I've never been able to do before, and I think very few people can do that, where you go from concept to completion 100% inside of one set of doors, and I'm pretty much doing it all myself. So as far as composites go, I started 3D printing about a decade ago. Yeah. And I love it. I love every aspect of it. My daughter was born with a spinal birth defect, and she has to wear a brace every day. And I'm currently redesigning her brace because the orthotics people are out to lunch, and it's caused a lot of problems with pressure points and things on her feet, and it's caused infections. So we took it into our own hands. They tried their best. They did their best, but it wasn't good enough. So now we're going out on our own, and I'm making this stuff. And so because it looks like it's our only choice, and we've tried pretty much everything. So it's out of necessity. The composites, a lot of composites now, I've been 3D printing composites. I've tried a lot of different materials. The problem that you have with some of this stuff is molds to make it cost so much at low quantities. But now I'm seeing, just to give you an example, the engine that you bought from me for $8,500, right? I don't really build a 2270 anymore, just because my technology has kind of gone away from that. I'm doing everything with bigger bores with nickeys. Every engine gets nickeys no matter what. I don't use cast iron anymore. anymore. So that engine, the 2270, is now like a 2320, is about the smallest thing that I built. Mm-hmm. About 190 horsepower is about the smallest thing. So with that, everything changes to the point where the money, it makes it easier for a guy to spend money when he sees that he's getting quality USA made stuff.
Right.
And when it's low volume and it's truly crafted and you don't have mass production in the mix, and it's not something that's built out of magazine parts. Sorry, it's just not.
Right.
So at the end of the day, that engine today, I propose the cheapest engine I'm building these days is $45,000. So the engine that you bought for $8,500 today is over $40,000.
That's wild.
And it's not even close to being the same engine, right? Because of the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm making. Horsepower wise, and I think this is something that needs to be said. People have a confusion that it's dollar per horsepower.
Right.
It's not that way, and it never has been. If you want to buy an engine that way, go buy a Chevy LS, right? Buy something that's generic. These engines have always been more expensive to build than any Chevy or Ford or Dodge or any of that. I mean, for what it costs to buy one of my engines, you can go out and buy a freaking Pro Mod drag race engine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but you're not going to get something that is made in one shop by one pair of hands and one mind from concept to construction. You're just not going to do that. And a certain group of people want that, and that is a certain group of people that I'm a part of. Like I think I would be a very hard customer to please because I do everything myself. I built my own shops. I plant my own fields. I grow my own food. I do everything myself. So I'm very hard to please because I'm used to pleasing myself and serving myself. But I look at it a lot of times like I think if I was a purchaser, the thing that I would be the least I would be willing to expect is what I'm producing for somebody. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the technology thing and the craftsmanship thing, I try to merge the two. So too many people try to use technology to take the human away from things, right? But to me, I try to use technology to enhance the human. I use AI every day. Like I use AI multiple times per day. When I'm running code and I'm designing something, a lot of times I'll run the code through AI and see if it has a problem with something. Right. I've saved crashes on my machines by doing that. I never use AI to generate things, but I use AI to edit things and to give me a different way of looking at it. And even things like I'm doing the billet type 4 heads, and that's a head that came from 20 years ago when I welded a pair of Type 4 heads up and put an angled exhaust port on them. I'm not the first person to ever do that, but if you look at some of the old angle flow heads of the Type 1 world that Bugpack brought back a few years ago, well, several years ago at this point, those heads always made a lot of sense to me. So I kind of use that same technology in what I call the tech sport head. And at this point, I mean, I bought a 5-axis Haas UMC to put on my floor so I can make those heads right here. I don't want to have anybody else to do it, because most shops today, as things try to get moved back to the U.S. for manufacturing, which is another whole conversation for another day,
right.
It's hard to find people to work. It's hard to find shops that want to do low volume stuff. And there's 15 CNC machines setting up at LN Engineering because everything that they make is made in the USA. And I'm the tech director there, and I could take up space on one of those machines. But those machines need to be making higher production parts like my IMS solution and all the things that they sell that's mine. So that's why I put these machines on my floor and taught myself how to model, taught myself how to do CAM, taught myself how to do programming, and bought a CAM grinder. And bought a SERDI machine to do cylinder heads, is because I want to do that stuff myself. I want to use technology to enhance my craftsmanship. I don't want to take the human away from it. I want the human experience to be amplified with it.
Right. Yeah, I think with the way that everything's evolved and gone into development specifically for the Type 4, and then you hop into the flat 6 and then you start coming back into that. I think a lot of that's pushed by people are getting a little older. They've got a little more discretionary income and they want what they want, right? They want something that's been proven, that's reliable, that they know they're going to put in their investment of their car, and it's not going to disappoint. Because too many people's dreams are crushed by, like, they go into this thing where they get an engine built and it grenades, a couple thousand miles later, and then they've got all kinds of, they just get out of the hobby and they're disappointed, and they've got all this thing that they've invested in that's just turned sideways. So I see a lot of people, and that's why I've told manufacturers, said people are willing to pay a little bit more for something, A, if it's made in America, and B, if it's higher quality, because the natural age group of us Volkswagen enthusiasts, we're all now in our 50s and 40s and 60s, and we've got a little more discretionary income, and we'd rather just buy something once and have something of quality, because in this industry we're too abused with low quality stuff. Now, speaking of low quality stuff, what are you doing with respect to some of the resources that are drying up, like bearings and things like that? Like is there anything that you're doing to try to look out for that, or how's that affecting what you've been doing?
Well, and the good thing about this is I have extremely low volume now. Like at peak, I was building 100 engines a year. This year I built 15 of the air-cooled engines. Next year I only want to build about 10 to 12 because I got a ton of development to do. So to answer that question directly, luckily from a bearing perspective, I've been able to have big lots of new old stock bearings, and I still have a ton of them. So, main bearings, I buy every set of new old stocks that I can find. I don't care how much they cost. I buy them. Now, the thing that you learn is some of the new old stock stuff is new old stock for a reason, because it came from a batch that had a problem. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful. Some of this stuff that got bought out from places that had parts for years and years, they knew certain batches had problems. The stuff never got sent back or never got thrown away. It just ended up on a shelf as NOS. And then you learn, they actually left out a hole in this bearing set. The number 4 bearing didn't even have one of the holes drilled in it. I've seen that bite people before. But I typically try to use new old stock bearings for that. I've been using some of the SM bearings from Germany. I've had to adjust my clearances on some of that stuff when it goes to machining the case to match the sizes of those. But those have proven to be okay quality, especially for a newly manufactured part. A lot of guys are just using whatever they can find, like the silver lines or this and that. And I mean, you kind of do what you want. But when I tried to use silver line bearings, it took 5 sets for me to find one set that was good. Like literally, I'd open up 5 sets, run them through my MC1 and measure everything. And I'm like, okay, I can build 2 sets out of this, and the rest of them are junk. Mm-hmm. And then, they're not steel back mains and this and that. And, it's 6 one, half dozen the other about how much that matters. Everybody has an opinion about that. But, there are things that we're working with. Recently started a conversation with King Bearing about making some Type 4 main bearings because their bearings have been, highly respected. I've started using other rod bearings from other engines. I've been using more bearings from Honda engines for the rod bearings and things like that, because they do have good quality, and you can get those from companies like ACL in Australia. And then, of course, the 2.8 Chevy bearings, the CB610P that everybody uses, has gone the way of the dodo. So you pretty much have to narrow up the 745 H series bearings if you want to use something like that and get a good quality bearing, unless you can find some old CB610Ps. So, yeah, it's definitely a challenge with that. The only things that do concern me as far as supply goes are the things that I can't make. And those are bearings and seals. Mm-hmm. And valves and piston rings. And there's been a lot of problems in the automotive industry with piston rings. And I've been a consultant on many of these cases for engines outside the Volkswagen and Porsche world, where you end up finding that, there's really only a couple of people making piston rings. Everybody else is remarketing these things. And you only learn this when all these different brands start having the exact same problem, because they're really the exact same ring and only one company's making that ring. So when that problem happens at that company, all these other companies have secondary and tertiary levels of damage from it, because it's all the same stuff, just got a different box.
Right.
And a piston ring's kind of hard ascertain the origin of it. But then when you send those things out and you have them destructively inspected and you find out that they have the exact same material composition, then you can prove where they came from. So we're seeing a lot of that. That's one reason I like to use the bore sizes where I can use a genuine Porsche ring set, because I don't have problems with those, and I can still find them new old stock, and I can still find good quality stuff. But yeah, bearings, seals, valves, and valve springs are kind of a thing that I can't manufacture in the shop. I'm currently working on a billet Type 4 case because I can make a whole Type 4 crankcase here. I'm just doing it for the hell of it. I just want to do it to make it my own. It's not something that there's absolutely no reason to do it. A Type 4 crankcase will handle all the boost and all the power we ever want to throw at it. But now I want to challenge myself, and I want to say, can I scan a Type 4 case, and then can I change all the things that I want to change, make it take my roller lifters, make it take all these things, and make something that I can build right here in my shop? And I can machine that crankcase in 2 days on the UMC. Do I want to do that? Why not? I got the capability. I want to challenge myself. It's an absolute waste of time if you look at it from a monetary
right.
perspective, right? But at the end of the day, I want it to be my engine. I don't want anything I build to be a sum of parts that comes out of Hot VW's magazine. I just don't want it to be that way. And the older I get and the more I mature with this, the more I want to make it my own, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a problem in the industry, is especially companies. Companies want easy. Easy is profitable. And that's one reason why I saw so much opposition and friction from other members of this industry when the Type 4 stuff really started taking hold about the time you bought your engine, is because they felt threatened. Because, one, they had gotten kind of happy where they were. They had good jobs or good businesses. They were cranking out engines 4, 5, 6 at a time, and they were able to build the same combinations over and over again, and that made it profitable for them. And most of them were in Southern California, and they had to have volume because they had huge bills at the end of the month. I didn't have that. I still don't, right?
Right.
The world that I operate in is completely different than that. So all the things that they thought I didn't. So I think that there was definitely a huge problem there, because there was a period that some of them felt threatened because I was taking work from them. And it really wasn't me that was taking work from them. It was the introduction to the Type 4 via the internet that took work from them. Right. And they made it a bigger deal than it ever was. I mean, I'm just one guy with a small crew working in the mountains of Northeast Georgia building engines. I never wanted to build 200 or 300 engines a year or 500 engines a year. I didn't want to do it. I certainly don't want to do that today. But that's what concerns me most, is the things that I can't make myself. So, and then I want to align with companies that are willing to make these things with low numbers, because you go to a bearing company, it takes a lot of time to create all the tooling to make these bearings, and all they care about is volume. That's all they care about. They have to be in that world of volume being king. And this is, I'm talking about building, 15 engines a year. If I have to buy a run of King bearings from them, unfortunately, I'll have to sell some of them through the Type 4 store, which I sold that store to LN back in 2012. But the Type 4 store will carry them just because we will have to make enough of them to make it economically viable.
Right. Now, I've got other questions as I'm surfing your site. So my first motor that I built with you was the 2270. The second motor we did was the 2615. And that was SDSEF and all stuff. Now I'm looking on your page, and it brings me to my question about electronic fuel injection. What are your thoughts on EFI and these air-cooled engines, and where you? Because I know you were really pursuing that for a while. Now I see that maybe you've got a slightly changed perspective. Now what's your story on the EFI?
So this is a good one, and it comes with a story. And I hope we don't have a time limit here, because this is going to get into some good stuff. Okay. Right. So I will preface this by saying my first experience with aftermarket fuel injection was the Electromotive Tech 1 when I was a Marine out in Southern California about 2 miles from the base was also a shop called Pantera Specialist. A guy named Lance Neist owned that. And there had been an article come out in Sand Sports, I think it was, where he put a Subaru engine with electromotive on it into a sand rail. Well, I wanted to do that. And I went to see him, and he set me up with the parts, and I literally had an electromotive tech system on a Volkswagen engine in 1995 as a Marine. Late in 95, early 96, I got deployed to Okinawa, and I had to leave the kind of project alone. But that was my first experience with it, okay? And we're talking 30 years ago. So I had no idea what I was doing with it, but I thought it was the coolest thing ever because carburetors always fought people and, blah, 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 especially in the desert. You hit whoops or whatever, you go up in the air, you had sloshing problems and all that. And I learned that Delortos were the best thing for that, better than Weber's on my engines, but they still had their complications in the sand. So I wanted to build a sand car that had fuel injection. And so that was my drive with that. When I came home, I started building a lot of fuel-injected engines. And this was, at the time, you come on the East Coast and you see a Volkswagen engine with programmable fuel injection, it may have been from another planet, right? So, but it got a lot of attention, and people were like, man, where'd this guy learn how to do this, right? Because it was, even back then, the IDA was still the king, right? Yeah. And I will also say that I love carburetors more than anything. I've got more carbureted cars than I do fuel injected. So what really drove me to do the fuel injection thing was when the Weber carburetors stopped being made in Spain because they were good quality when they were Spanish. They had a few little flukes and things, but when they started making those carbs, when they came back out with them, there was a period of time you couldn't get them, but they started assembling them here in the States, and the parts changed and all that. And one of the major players in the Volkswagen world, an industry leader, sent me 20 sets of carburetors. They were having all kinds of problems with these carbs, and they didn't build engines themselves. They said, we want you to look at these for us. We'll pay you for your time. I put 20 sets of carbs on a test engine on my dyno and had a 70% failure rate. And what drove this was a Volkswagen-powered replica that had caught on fire and had an insurance claim for a lot of money because somebody got injured, and they claimed it was from the carburetors. And I learned that the trait of the carburetor could have certainly caused this problem. So at that point, I did not want to use those carburetors, so I went to electronic fuel injection on everything for about 3 or 4 years, and that's when you bought the 2615 from me.
Right, with the SDS setup on it, yeah.
And this is where things start to change. So what I'll explain is that people a lot of times set themselves up for disaster with programmable fuel injection, because when they hear fuel injection, the first thing they think of is their modern car.
Right.
And then the next thing they think of is, I can take this old 50-year-old, 60-year-old engine design, and I can make it perform and start up cold and behave exactly like my modern car because they both have fuel injection. Right. Okay? The only term I have for that is bullshit.
Yeah.
You can beat that out if you want. I have to explain it that way.
No, that's
that is that is the only thing I can say to that. If you are an owner of one of these vehicles and you think that you can bolt any system onto it and make it like a modern car, you have fooled yourself and should sell the car and buy a modern car. That's the only thing I can say. You will not take this 60-year-old engine design or whatever and make it perform just like a modern car.
That's also air-cooled.
In most cases.
That's also air-cooled.
Right. So, exactly. Now, the reason for this, and this is particular to Volkswagen and Porsche stuff, right? Mm-hmm. In the V8 world, there's been a lot of private equity's driven a lot of this. But, Holley and these other companies have come out with V8 systems, right, that you could put on a V8 and you can crank the thing up and it auto-tunes and does all that. I've actually owned one of those. I had a 67 Ford Bronco that had Phytec on it, and it was awesome. It was awesome. But the reason why is because the intake was designed for it. It was a perfect animal for it. That thing started and drove. I owned that thing for a couple of years, and I never had to tune it. It was perfect. It really was. But that led me to try to put the Phytech system onto a Volkswagen engine. It was completely a waste of time. All the same BS that came with the other systems was coming into play with it. And so I think that there's the main thing that the main people that want programmable fuel injection are exactly the ones that don't need it. And they are the people that do not understand carburetors. Okay. Yeah. And I'm going to go out on a limb right here. And we're probably going to get some comments about this, but if you know me, you know I don't care. I will say, if you cannot tune a set of carbs or a carburetor, don't fool yourself into thinking you can program fuel injection.
Right.
Because people are going to fuel injection thinking they're getting away from all the complications of carburetors, when ultimately they took something that only had a couple of settings, like idle and main jets, right? Mm-hmm. They went from that to at least a 12 by 12 fueling table and at least a 12 by 12 ignition table. And now, instead of having just a couple of settings and using a timing light to set their timing or whatever, now they have to have 144 inputs for their fueling and 144 inputs for their ignition. And some of these systems self-tune, but they have a window for that.
Yeah.
And I've used everything from that SDS Tech 1. Mm-hmm. I've used the CB setup, which the old CB setup from back in the 90s actually worked pretty damn good. And it was easy. It just had a couple of knobs on it. I made big power with that thing. I've used that. I've used every other mainstream system. I've got two engines here right now. One's for a 930 turbo. It's getting a M150 Motec on it. So I use this stuff. I've used every system. I've used Haltech, Lynx. I even did a system that came from China, was a programmable system. It went on every Chinese-made car. And they had one fuel injection system with all these different wiring harnesses, and I made that work on my 912E with a guy that wanted to bring those over and sell them here. Mm-hmm. And you had to tune this thing in like DOS mode. It was so outside the – so, but anyway.
You had to go to a garage sale, buy a computer to program it.
Oh, yeah. But my 912E has had 7 different EFI systems on it over the years. Uh-huh. Guess what it's got on it right now and what it's had for the past 5 years?
What?
A pair of DeLorto 40s.
Yeah.
I've
tried
driven,
and true.
I've driven the car more with those DeLortos on it than I have all the fuel injection systems combined with the least amount of effort, right? So the problem that people have with dual carbs is synchronization. Mm-hmm. That's the main problem, and getting them set up right the first time. I use the SyncLinks cable system, and I have since 2008. I won't use anything else. And when you learn that system, your carburetors stay in sync for years. Once you've adjusted it a couple of times after you've initially installed it, the thing just works. And I think that's the major problem. And you see all these hex bars and round bars and all these different linkages. What you learn is all those mechanical levers are amplifying harmonics. So you end up with accelerator pumps that are dribbling and carburetors that have the float bowls shaking because they have a tuning fork across the top of them in the name of a hex bar. Right. And it's taking all the extra engine dynamics and amplifying them, and it shakes the fuel. There's all these things. It's not one thing that leads to problems. It is a multitude of them that have an equation that equals a sum of problems. But so my thing about fuel injection, if somebody comes to me wanting a fuel-injected engine today, it's hard to buy it from me because this is what I tell them. Look, why do you want it? And then they explain to me why they want it, and it's every problem or it's everything that's going to make it harder for them to have it because they don't have mechanical – they don't have the ability to tune it themselves, and they don't understand – the intake, compression, power, and exhaust of an engine. They don't understand ignition advance. They don't understand why any of these things are done. They just know they hear the word fuel injection and they think that means I turn my key and it starts and runs. Right. Now, are there people that can do that? Yes. And I am one of them. And I have done it with SDS and my old double cab. I've done it with Motec. I've done it with other systems. But let me tell you what it takes. It takes a solid year in all your seasonal changes, and it takes driving to every elevation you're going to operate that vehicle at and making tuning adjustments to it. And then taking those adjustments and saving them. So after you went through all the different climbs and places, and after you went through all the different seasons, and after you went through winter and summer blend fuels, which people don't know those exist, okay, and you've tuned around those things, and then you've got the thing where it'll start up and fire up when it's cold and it's 15 degrees outside, or when it's heat soaked and it's 100 degrees outside. Once you've worked through all that, then if you did your job correctly, you can make it work pretty much like a modern car. Did I get my 912E to do that? Yes, I did. The difference was that until 2007, that was the only car that I drove every day. Until 2008, I'd never owned a water-cooled car. Everything I had was always air-cooled, every vehicle I'd ever owned.
Yeah.
So, and I drove it every day. So I put 160,000 miles on my 912E in an 8-year period. And a lot of that was spent doing the same 3-hour drive. And I did that with several different fuel injection systems. So yes, I was able to make it where it perfectly ran. But then all of a sudden one day that system had a problem happen inside the ECU. And I pulled it off and I put carbs on it and I haven't went back. So I think that's a big misconception, is that EFI is just a bolt on and it's simple and that's it. I've had more people that had major problems with EFI come to me and say, this thing don't run right, what am I going to do, than anything else. I've got 2 356 customers right now that had engines built by other people. They were 356-based engines. Both of them had fuel injection put on. The systems were different. One was a red line system, and one was a who made the other one? It's a Megasquirt, right? Or it was the commercial version of Megasquirt.
Right.
And both of those people have all these problems that ended up causing an engine failure. So I said, look, let's rip this stuff off here. You obviously you can't get it tuned right. And usually what I've seen with these is they always run super rich. People have this complex about them in the air-cooled world where they think everything is solved if I just throw fuel at it. Like, lean, an engine being lean or even on the edge of lean is like this evil thing. And they don't understand how throwing too much fuel at it washes down the cylinder walls. It causes all kinds of wear there. It washes down the oil. It contaminates the oil with fuel. And you cause a much bigger problem by over-enriching this thing than you would have if you properly tuned it. But no, let's just throw more fuel at it. So both of those engines died because they were super, as I call, pig-rich.
Right.
So, but that's my thing about fuel injection. To me, I will build a fuel-injected engine for somebody, but they have to have the reality and the understanding, and they have to have the aptitude to make changes to it. And there's very few people, because ultimately, if they had that understanding, they'd be building their own engine. They wouldn't need me.
Right. So you went down the process of, you had the same aspirations everybody else did. I'm going to find a turnkey setup I can put on these air-cooled motors, and it's going to work once I get all the bugs figured out. Then once you got all the bugs figured out, you still had, it ends up being more complicated. End result, no more performance adds, no more world of difference between carbs and that. The only difference is more expense, more complication, and sometimes more heartache when you're delivering. Because when you're delivering something to a customer turnkey and the guy has, cross some wires, or he's done this, or he's got something that's putting off some sort of frequency next to his brain or something, and there's all these things that you can't figure out. It's real difficult to try to be able to deliver to a satisfied customer when it's like you shipped it to there and there's a couple variables that could go wrong, and when they go wrong, they go really wrong.
Well, and I'll expand on that with a story that's epic. And this is something that I experienced firsthand. So about 2008, and this goes right back to the wire swapping thing. And the problem is that when you have a reputation I have, and you have the type of customer satisfaction that I have, and you have the prices that I have, there is no excuse for a problem. Right. Zero excuse for a problem. It has got to be beyond perfect right out of the gate. And if there's anything wrong, if there's a scratch on it, or if there's a human hair on the engine and it's in the crate, I've already failed. Like, literally, that is the expectation that people have for what I do. And that's very difficult to achieve from my end, but I do it. It takes my life to do it, but I do. So '08, I build an engine for a guy who has an expensive car. He takes it to a Porsche shop to have this engine installed into his expensive car. This engine wasn't even that expensive in 2008, right? It was not that much more expensive than anything else.
Right.
Now, I put SDS on it because SDS was simple digital systems. I still use SDS sometimes. I've got a car that has SDS. It's had it for 20 years, and I love it. As rudimentary as it is, I love it because it can be tuned with that little handheld programmer, and it's pretty hard to screw it up once you've learned how to tune it. So it's so simple that it's actually used with success in the general aviation world. That's actually where most SDS systems are sold, is for Rotax and Subaru engines in general aircraft. Okay, so I sell this engine to this guy. He takes it to a Porsche shop. He should have took it to a Volkswagen shop, but some people just want to go pay more money and say I had this high-end Porsche shop install it into the car. I dynoed this thing for 2 days. It was perfect. It did everything the way it was supposed to. I had videos I showed him. It made 180 horsepower. It was perfect. I send it to him. The shop puts it in the car. They crank it up. All it will do is idle. So they work through all this stuff. I talk to them. I tell them some things to check. All it'll do is idle. It's got a problem with this. It's got a problem with that. So the guy started complaining. And I just don't know how to handle complaints, so I don't deal with them. I just never do. So I said, look, clearly I'm going to have to come out there. So, I get on a plane. I fly to the opposite coast. I get there, and on the plane, the whole time I'm going through all these things that it can be. So I show up, and with the SDS system, you can have the handheld screen there, and you can have certain screens pulled up, and it will tell you what sensors are reading what, right?
Right.
Well, when I used to dyno these things, I would set them up so the throttle position sensor was reading a throttle position of +7 on the screen, and I would adjust the throttle adjustments and everything so that +7 was there, so it would never be close enough to it over-enriching the thing and going up to around a 10, but it was far enough from 0 that it would never try to stall.
Right.
So I show up, and it's idling at 7. And I said, okay, but it's idling at -7. So this is before I even fired the engine up. All I did was turn the key on. I just turned the key on and looked at this. So then I hit the throttle, and it goes to like -30. I said, okay. I brought some tools with me. I go back to the connector where the connector goes on to the throttle position sensor. Now, keep in mind, when I ship these engines, every single wire is labeled with a label maker on that wire. This goes to ground. This goes to 12 volts. This goes to the sensor lead, whatever. So when I saw this happen, I knew that somebody had taken 2 of the wires and inverted them. Mm-hmm. So I go back to the back, and when I shipped it to them, to pull the harness through the car, they had to terminate the weather pack terminals themselves, right? And on the dyno, I would never use the weather pack terminals. I would just tie the wires together and tape them up, so we didn't waste the terminals, the weather pack stuff, right? Because it was going to have to come off to get passed through the vehicle. And I knew that. But I labeled each end, like I labeled the connector. This is where these wires go, and then I labeled the harness. This is where these wires go. I even took pictures and showed them going together, like total idiot proof. So I knew when I saw those negatives that they had swapped the numbers. So I go back. Keep in mind, I never cranked this thing up, right? Before this, I knew it was wrong. So I swapped the wires. I go back, and now it's reading a +7. Okay. So I knew it was fixed. But now this shop had messed with every single freaking thing in the entire ECU trying to fix the problem. Because as soon as they tried to give it throttle, it pulled fuel. It didn't give it extra fuel. So the accelerator pump was taking it away, and it would stall and fall on its face. So I go back through, and I had a spreadsheet of all my numbers from the dyno. I restored all those numbers right back into it. Cranked the thing up. It ran beautifully. I was finished in 15 to 20 minutes, and I left. And that was it. So that experience taught me everything. And since then, it is extremely hard to buy something from me that has fuel injection, because that experience that in my time of being in business, doing this since the age of 13 years old, was the most difficult that I've ever dealt with.
Yeah.
And it was just because an idiot that was getting paid way too much for his skill set swapped two wires and could not even put things together that were labeled for him. And I even had the picture on a printed out piece of paper I took with me, and I showed the owner, this is what I sent with the engine. You know, this is not a new thing. I don't know why they couldn't follow this. Look at the color of these wires, right? And they clearly had this wrong. So he went from hating me to hating the shop because somebody had to be villainized, right?
Right.
They just had to be. So the proof was in the pudding because he was standing right there when I fixed it. And I fixed it with one tool. So that was my experience with that. Now, let me tell you where that is today. And I'm going to give some props to somebody who really deserves them, because he is a craftsman, he's an engineer, and that's Mario at the Dub Shop.
Yeah.
Mario, I've told him many times, you are underappreciated in the Volkswagen world. Let me help you go where you're appreciated.
Right.
But he loves Volkswagens and he stays there, and I appreciate that. But I've told him, dude, let me help you, right? Let me get you into an area where your work is going to be greatly appreciated. And I think it is appreciated in the Volkswagen world, but in another world, it actually can be applied to a group of people that are willing to pay for that.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, he and I, for the past 3 years, have been working on a fuel injection system. And we're really close to making it now. I actually have a piece of material down in my machine shop right now. I've already modeled up the intake manifold where it bolts to the head. That is the last part that we have to make. It's literally taking us 2 years to get to the point of making the first one. We started out with revision A and ended up on like revision I. And then we backed up to revision G because it was the best all the way around. But that tells you how many of these things that we modeled, use CFD to do calculations with it. I put it on my flow bench. He put it on his flow bench. I would modify things. He would modify things. I would go back to, bolt it on an engine. We kept going back and forth till we found the one combination of the intake manifold that did not lose any volume and only picked up port velocity on what I consider to be my strongest flowing standard Type 4 head. It flows 225 CFM on the intake. So literally,
wow.
If I put a like a 48 IDA on that thing, it'll still flow the same amount with a typical intake on it as what the cylinder head flows. But it took us a long time to get to that point with the EFI manifold. Like when we first put the EFI manifold on it, it took that 225 CFM port down to like 196. And then we just kept working with it. So the idea was, let's don't lose port velocity. Let's don't lose anything as we're gaining the airflow. So we're able to keep the volume, keep the velocity, and make it bolt onto the engine where it will fit into anything from a Beetle to a 356. Now, what's unique about this is not really that unique, but in the world of the Type 4 it is, because it uses a central plenum, and it uses a Porsche Cayman throttle body, which is
single throttle body.
A single throttle body. So if you imagine a DTM that has a pair of intakes hooked very tightly to the side of the DTM, come up, and they split above the shroud and kind of slightly go behind the shroud, and then the intake snorkel comes over the back of the shroud, and it puts the throttle body in that little 90-degree nook there between the alternator and the shroud.
Yeah.
And that way we can very easily duct clean air to it, and it's drive-by-wire. Okay, so no more throttle cables. And then one of the main problems I've had with aftermarket EFI is getting a good stable throttle or good stable idle when the engine is hot versus cold. Like you can make it idle cold, but that makes it idle too high when it's hot, because these systems are not generally made for air-cooled engines that have this great variability in their temperatures.
With expansion.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, with expansion and everything else. I mean, air-cooled engines just do not run good when they're cold. So that's the problem, is getting something that runs good hot and cold. But when you have this system, and we're driving it a couple of different ways, the one that we're using now it's got fuel tech that's going to go on this first one. And it's taken us 3 years to get to the first one, obviously, just because we've been doing it kind of when we had time. But we're ready to do it now. It's actually went from waiting on him to waiting on me, because now I've actually already done all the programming on this thing. I just need to throw it in the machine and work through the first prototype part to make this out of aluminum in the UMC. But that's going to be an expensive part, because just the piece of billet aluminum to make it costs $200 per manifold. So you've got to waste a lot of material to make it because of the design of it. But once we get that, then having the drive-by-wire cancels out a lot of these problems we've had, because it's always going to work to reach its target air-fuel ratio, and also it's going to work to trim out the throttle to keep the same RPM that we've targeted for the idle RPM. And that's something, especially with ITBs, individual throttle bodies with fuel injection, you're fighting that, because you got throttle position sensors that are usually just on one throttle body.
Right.
And you've got linkage connecting to the two that
That's
give a mechanical,
yeah.
A mechanical variability. So having this where it's drive-by-wire is going to be epic. So we've made it fit in a Beetle, a bus, a 356, a 912. The same system will fit on all of those with a DTM. The next thing, once we get that done, will be to make it work with my horizontal cooling system deal. But I feel good about it working. But let me tell you what's going to happen is once we get it worked out, then I'll have to do what I did back in 2006 and do another cross-country run where, I did 3,450 miles and fully data logged it from here all the way to Sacramento, took the long way. When I got over there, I think it was 96 miles an hour in the quarter mile that I pulled with that 2270 in the old bubonic plague, which has been retired ever since. But ultimately, what it would take is building one combination that is not variable from the combination perspective for a Type 4, meaning that when I finally do this, it'll be one displacement, one camshaft, one cylinder head profile, one compression ratio with no variations at all in that combination. Then you drive the thing cross country, you go up to the top of the Continental Divide, you go 12,000 feet, you tune up there, you tune all the way back down to 5,000 around Denver. Then you tune all the way down to sea level. Then you go down to New Orleans and go below sea level. And you tune everything in between. And then you tune it with different fuels. And then you do that over. And then I drive it for a full set of seasons here. Once you do all of that, and you get that tuning perfect with that combination, and you don't mess with that combination, then and only then do I believe I could realistically sell that fuel-injected engine to a customer and say install it exactly like it is and have it perform the way that it should. Yeah. Until then, there's variabilities that I don't like that will lead me right back to 2008 with those two inverted wires that just left a really bad memory for me.
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you look at, because here in Las Vegas, there's a lot of manufacturing test facilities here for Ford and a bunch of those places. And when they're R&Ding these cars, there's guys driving and there's two computers set up inside the car, wires going everywhere. And these guys are doing exactly what you're doing, but they've got a fleet of retired people driving these cars, just collecting data so that they can go and refine this data to deliver something that you can drop a brick on the throttle and not grenade the thing. You know what I mean? And the problem is you're one guy trying to do all this stuff and you're doing it for the love of the hobby because someone says, could we make it better? Could we make it more reliable? And could we make it more enjoyable just to drive this car down the road? You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, and ironically, when Bill Cans and he was the one that was my co-pilot in the old Blue Bug, when we were doing that up and down the Continental Divide, to test the DTM, I mean, we only saw an 18-degree of data logged temperature delta between all four cylinders of that engine with 16 sensors on it from over 3,450 miles at an average speed of 76 miles an hour, average speed. And this was all data logged, and it's all still on my website. If you go to the cross-country drive, click on each one of those. You'll see exactly all the data. You can go to it now while we're on here. It's all still there, like every bit of data, the head temperature, the EGT, the CHT, fuel economy, everything was right there. But when we were doing that at Loveland Pass, we actually met some guys in a Dodge Ram. And they were doing exactly what you're talking about. They were engineers from Chrysler, and they're up there doing what we're doing. And they had all this stuff, like the whole dash is covered in computers. And they had like moving blankets over the top of it so nobody could see what they were doing. They were parked at the top of the level of pass. We actually have a picture of our car next to them.
Yeah.
And that's what they were doing. So that's how they do it too, right? You're the only person I've ever talked to that still really even knows how they do a lot of this stuff. But that's the idea, is you have to start out with that one big standard. But the problem with it with a Volkswagen is as soon as you change the cam, that's all gone to hell.
Correct.
As soon as you change the compression, that's all gone to hell. So that has to be the one and done combo. And I'm really close to that being where I'm going now. I mean, now that I can make this stuff myself, and I can make my own camshaft blanks, and I can run my own roller lifters, and I can make my own cylinder heads. Now that I have these capabilities right here, then I'm to the point where I can make it where this is a standardized unit. Now, at the end of the day, I don't like that, because as a craftsman, I want everything I do to be imperfectly perfect, meaning I want it to have some little something that's not right, because that makes it where it's the human factor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I was looking at a set of custom cabinets the other day, and I saw where the guy, when he planed them, he planed one thinner than the other. And I said, that proves to me that a human did this, because humans are imperfect, right? And that proved that, yeah, a machine didn't do this. You know, a human was behind that. So it kind of goes against the grain of everything I'm about, with every engine being a little different. But that's the way it has to be if you want to create a truly proven, truly tuned, fuel-injected engine. That's the only way to do it. And then there's still a chance that it can be off, because the way that I dyno it here, with the fuel pressure it's got and the fuel pump that it's got and everything, that all has to go into that car. So literally, for me to test it here means I got to take the fuel pump that's going to be getting used, the fuel pressure regulator that's going to be getting used, and the same fuel system, and that all has to go into that car exactly as it was tested. If there's any deviation in that, everything's thrown off. You can change a fuel pressure alone and throw off the tune.
Oh, yeah. No, there's a lot that goes into it. And the craziest part about this hobby is everybody does it for the love of the hobby, because nobody's getting rich doing this, because it's so involved. I mean, when I talk to Adam Wick, he's done a few motors for me out here. He says the time it takes to build one Volkswagen engine, just the time it takes between sorting bearings and machining stuff to fit and adjusting fan shroud, like all this, just to get everything to work where it's going to be able, that car can leave, go to the desert, run wide open for, 12 hours, 24 hours, and not have, any stuff that you could make dependable. He says the time it takes to build one VW motor, he could build 3 LS engines.
Oh, yeah.
In the same hours.
So the same thing with a modern Porsche engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's two things that you will not find anywhere in my shop. You will not find a calendar, nor will you find a clock, because neither of those two things have a place in the workshop of a craftsman. They just don't belong here. And that's why this stuff's expensive. Mm-hmm. Is because we have to be compensated for the life we're putting into this, and it's truly life. So I can build a 450 horsepower Porsche M96 engine in 1/2 the amount of time that I can build a Type 4. And I know that without even having a clock or a calendar.
That's crazy.
I just know that, okay? And because everything with the Type 4 is amplified in its perfection. These engines, any air-cooled engine, is very unforgiving, right? Every mistake that you make is enhanced and exacerbated greatly with these older engines, because you have to think, I mean, we're doubling or sometimes tripling the power output, and we're doing that with something that was meant to be thrown away. And people are like, the German engineers, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hold on a minute here. Every time I hear that, I also tell these people, we are working with an engine that was the Kia of its day. Right? The accountants still had a lot to say about this. It was the cheapest, well, other than probably a Fiat, it was the cheapest car you could buy, right? So ultimately, yeah, the German engineers, they were smart. They did a lot with what they had to work with. But at the end of the day, they were not Porsche engineers. No. They did not have the budget that Porsche had. And so when I look at a Porsche, and I drive one a lot, I've got several, it's a nice Volkswagen. That's all it is. It's just a nice Volkswagen. I used to say that my 912E was a Volkswagen that had good heat.
That's it.
Literally. That's all it was, right? And I still say that. So today, even though I do half my work is Porsche, half my work is Volkswagen, I'm still more of a Volkswagen person than I am a Porsche person. And a lot of that, can probably be tied back to my roots and how I started all this, because that's what means the most to me.
Yeah.
The Porsche thing was, and most all of us in the Porsche industry that have really been successful, a friend of mine, Tony Callis, a lot of us, we all started with Volkswagens. Like Bruce Anderson was a Volkswagen person. I mean, it's something that you work up to, right? I mean, and not everybody goes down that path, but most people that are at the top of their game in the Porsche world from the engine perspective, we all started with Volkswagens. And people don't want to say that, but I proudly say that.
Yeah. No, I mean, you've done a lot. And I mean, shoot, we could talk for 5 hours over here about, I mean, there's so much to get to, even if you start. One question I have, because you've always been kind of a disruptor, because you do what you're going to do what you're set out to do. Right. And you might take a little input here and there just to hear what people have to say. But if you believe something's going to be a certain way, you go into that headlong. Right. And it's given you some pushback in the VW world. Have you seen the same pushback in the Porsche world because Porsche world, there's a lot of guys that are benchtop geniuses in the VW world, but the Porsche world, I think, is a whole different ball game. And I know with the IMS bearing and stuff like that you've been doing, and the experience that you've had with the Volkswagen world and bringing some of that into the Porsche world, have you had the same pushback in that, or has people been willing to accept change really easily in the Porsche world compared to VW world with the stuff that you've been doing there?
Well, and let me tell you, it's changed a lot in the time. I mean, I've been doing these M96 engines for over 20 years now. I mean, in the beginning, I was ashamed to say I was doing it. We were doing it in the back of the shop. But I didn't know if I wanted to do anything with it, because I'd never had a water-cooled Porsche on the property. Mm-hmm. I'd never owned one, right? Until I went and bought that Boxster that was blown up. I'd never had one. And then, like I said, I never drove a water-cooled car until 2007. I actually owned that Boxster for a while before I even drove the thing. But at the end of the day, what I've learned is that in the Porsche world, a lot of people buy success. And I've seen this because there's people that should not be where they are. And they're only there because they got with a certain couple of customers. They got private equity behind them or something. They bought this image, and they go into this world with all this bling and all of this banner and advertisements and videos, and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Zero clue what they're doing. They're literally stumbling through and playing the part. Like, I see that much more in the Porsche world than I do the Volkswagen world.
Oh, really?
Because in the Porsche world, there's money. They can get money from people, and all they do is say, hey, I'll hook you up with your car or whatever, or I had this business that I sold, and I want to start doing this other stuff now, and I want to be an engine builder. And they come in, and they play the part. And today, people actually will fall for this stuff. Like, we had to earn every bit of ground we got. I mean, I feel like a Marine fighting at the Battle of Belleau Wood when we're earning every inch of ground with blood. That's the way you feel in that industry when you first start out in it. And everything we did was questioned. Nobody believed what we did. I was the guy that just worked on Volkswagens. They called me a hobbyist sometimes way back then. Right. The Porsche people did. And we had to earn every bit of the ground that we got to chew with that. And today, it's created a whole different character for me. But just like I've proven myself to you 20 years with that bus engine, I've proven myself to the industry by making things that work and they perform. And there's no BS. There's no banner. There's no false glory. There's no playing the part. I'm building this stuff myself. And so I think the pushback is different, right? But there is a lot more what I would call strokers in the Porsche world than there is in the Volkswagen world. Volkswagen people are more real. Mm-hmm. From I'm talking about the people that are in the industry, that own the companies, own the businesses. They're much more real than the Porsche side. And then once you start really taxing these people in the Porsche world, you learn what they really don't know, and you learn what they really haven't experienced.
Right.
And it's just because they got success that they never had to earn.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing.
Interesting. Well,
but from the customer, I'll explain it from the customer's perspective. So you have a different kind of customer. But I will say that today, my customer for a Type 4 is almost the same as my customer for a water-cooled modern car. And I've even built engines for both people. Like, I've got many customers that came to me years ago for an air-cooled engine. Then they got a water-cooled car, and they came back to me. I can count at least a dozen of those guys right now, and I'm currently working with one. I've got a guy that I built a water-cooled engine for probably 7 or 8 years ago. Then he bought a 912 and wants to put a Type 4 in it. He's currently one of the builds I've got on my board. I've already proven myself to him. So after you've done this for a long time, people start coming back, right? I mean, you bought an engine from me 20 years ago. You come back, right? Yep. So, I mean, that's to me, that is a success in this, is that when you are able to do something this long and you've got this long legs, as I like to say, and you don't have to have magazine ads, and you don't have to have a lot of buddies. Like, I'm not one that buddies up with people. I'm not one that goes to events and hangs out with all these people. I've never have been. I never will be. I march to the beat of my own drum completely, and I haven't been to an event since 2019. You know, wow. I take that back. I went to Circular Wagons because the event organizer there is a great friend of mine, and he's not been well. I was afraid it might be the last show, so I went to that back in October with a good friend of mine, Lee Street, and we went to that show. But that's the first one I've been to since COVID. But yeah, I think that from a customer's perspective, the Porsche guys, they a lot of times are more, I think they're more open to these people that are playing the part, right? Because the owners sometimes don't know enough to see if the guy's BSing or not, right? Like they think that every rebuilt engine is the same. They wouldn't know a piston from a crank pulley that fell out of the sky and hit the table in front of them. Now, that's not the way with all of them. Like, right. Some of them are extremely educated with this stuff, but most of them, especially today, they're not that way.
There's a lot.
So I think there's a lot of difference between the owners of these cars. But I will say that the ownership of the Type 4 has changed, because today, almost everybody that buys one of these from me is a gray-haired guy, right? Like you talked about the age of people. Yeah. And so the people that we're all getting older. The people I was dealing with 20 years ago that were my age 20 years ago are now my age still, but they just got money. They got a different kind of money, and they're wanting to retire. A lot of people come to me. I've got a year or two left before I retire. I've had this car for 20 years. I've been following you for 20 years, and I want to buy this engine. That is what I hear almost all the time. Yeah. Almost every story starts out like that. Like, I've been following you for a long time, and I can finally do this.
No, it's good, man. Listen, you've secured your place in the industry for sure. You've done a lot of stuff that's been innovative in this space, and really, I mean, and we've watched you grow through it too, from small and starting small, and then chasing numbers and trying to get so many engines on your belt to, like, I just want to do the best and do it on my timeline. You know what I mean? And every business owner has to go through that experience, right? Where you think more is better, and then you realize, I just want to do what I want to do and do it great, you know? And I think that's been your underlying current throughout, but there was this vision of, like, if I got to so many, or, you know, it might be trying to, you know, you're trying to convert the world, right, to Type 4s. And it's just been, it's now something that, you know, your reputation's been longstanding for a long time. And if there's a go-to guy for Type 4 stuff, it's you. You know what I mean? So listen, I appreciate everything you've done for the hobby, and not to mention, which we didn't even touch on, is your commitment to educating people to do it themselves. You know? Well,
that and educating them to educate their children. This is the most important part of this, is that, you know, if my dad had not had a knee problem when I was 7 years old and I needed to change oil in that thing, I might not be where I'm at today. If I hadn't bought a lawnmower, and if my dad had not have, given me a place to work on this stuff, and if he had not been able to notice that I had this aptitude that was a God gift, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Right.
If my dad had not have challenged me to get the hell out of a house and go do my own thing, and if he had not have had that doubt of what I was capable of, it really never a doubt. He knew what I could do, but he had to explain it to me that way because I had to prove him wrong, and he knew that I had to prove him wrong. And that's what every parent out there needs to do. Kids today, and I will say, everybody bitches about these kids. You will not hear that from me, because I see the exact opposite from today's kids. My daughter's school adopted our mechanical classroom program. And every year in March, I go there. I give a month of my time, and I go there. And this year, my daughter will actually be my co-instructor. She's in 8th grade. We teach
Nice.
7th graders. And so she'll actually be teaching kids 1 year younger than her. And she's going to work with me. The head of the school is allowing that to happen. And so I give that month, and I go there, and I teach these kids with a mechanical classroom. So basically we have a small engine, like a Predator engine. It comes from Harbor Freight. She and I created a whole program where we roll a toolbox in. It has a special workstation on it that lifts up hydraulically. So no matter how tall or short the kid is, no matter how strong or weak they are, the engine's in front of them. They work in teams of 3, sometimes 4, according to how big the class is. And we take an engine apart. We learn every piece of it. We learn its function. We put it back together using practical application, where it's like I lead and they follow. I have an engine in front of the classroom with a couple of cameras on it, and it's being projected on the screen. I do it, and they follow along, and I'm instructing them what they're doing, what the name of the part is, and all that. We learn the theory of combustion engines. One of the first things they learn is intake, compression, power, and exhaust. And we take them through all the cycles and how the engine works.
Nice.
And the first year that I did this, and we literally transition a science classroom into an engine shop in 15 minutes. We push all the desks back out of the way. We roll these 10 workstations in. I roll my workstation in. I grab a couple of things off the desk, and we have just made an engine shop. That's the whole idea behind the mechanical classroom. It converts any classroom to a mechanical classroom in 15 minutes, and that's what we've been able to do. It's totally self-contained. So ultimately, we do this, and then at the end of it, they're able to start this engine up and hear it run after we've went through everything. So they learn about sealing things up and all that. And it's not about being a mechanic. It's not about being a technician. It's about seeing something work that you have taken apart and put back together again. So the first year that I did this, I had parents meeting me in the parking lot, thanking me for this. And these are parents who have like no mechanical aptitude. One guy's a professional golfer, no mechanical aptitude. And his kid came home for the first time ever, and he's like, I'm going to take my bicycle apart. He takes his bicycle apart, puts it back together again. And the kid goes from not telling his parents what he's doing at school that day and not really caring to going home and talking about this class. And this happened. I got this from multitudes of parents every time we had something like this go down. So, and the parents they support it. So some of these parents went out and get a go-kart, right? So they could have something to work on. And cool. So some of these kids have a mechanical aptitude that's a God gift they would never know they had if they did not have that experience. So a couple of them now want to be engineers that never wanted to be an engineer before. They didn't know what they wanted to do. Hard to say if they're actually going to do it when they get out of school or not, but at least they're interested in it. So, in the way the curriculums are today and all of this, there's no room for this. They took all the shop classes out of everything. So a small class like this is our only hope of getting kids to have that experience where they might be able to let that God gift shine. And the parents have to get behind that, And a lot of Volkswagen parents, you see them in groups and stuff. Hey, here's my kid helping me change oil or whatever. That's wonderful. That's exactly what you need to do. Whether the kid acts like they want to do it or not, whether they're interested in it or not, you've got to at least explore it,
Yeah.
And I've seen this, and I've had 1,400 people come through my doors in a hands-on Porsche engine class in the last 18 years, and half of those people were technicians that had no place even owning the toolbox. They were professionals that couldn't be taught.
Yeah.
But they did the job, and they just never had the God gift. So the ones of us that got it, and I got it in my DNA from both sides, but it's funny how it skipped my dad. He couldn't work on anything. But my brother is fairly mechanical. He used to build airboats and stuff in South Florida. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think that that's something everybody needs to do. And the kids, I've just not seen the problems everybody complains about. Oh, these kids don't want to learn this and that. No, these kids want to learn.
Yeah.
Last summer, I had 2 interns here. One was 16 and one was 18. The 18-year-old was my nephew. He just got out of high school. He's actually working with me over Christmas now. And, both of their dads, they're one of them grew up on a farm, and he's around cows and agriculture stuff all the time. They got out here, it was 100 degrees. They worked their tails off. We changed tracks on my skid steer loader. We worked on tractors. We moved stuff. I had them running CNC machines. I had them doing a little bit of everything. And those kids came in here, and they had a work ethic that is better than most grown-ups do.
Yeah.
So I do not support this thing where the kids don't want to learn. No, the kids have not been exposed to things that intrigue them enough.
Yeah.
And there might be a certain generation there where all they want to do is sit on an iPad or a phone. But I think this current set of teenagers and the current people that are in their early 20s are not part of those. I think we're starting to see it's starting to go back the other way now. Like, I think that the people that are about 30, maybe 35, that group didn't really get a fair shake. But what I'm seeing now is a completely different thing. I think people have realized that, yeah, we took away from this. The trades are hurting. We can't find anybody to work on things. We can't find anybody to do plumbing work. We can't find this. We can't find that. So I think that that's actually being recognized now. It's just going to be a big delayed response in what it takes to get people back into this stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, no, listen, that's good, man. It's good. You're using your skill set to help train and teach other people, man. It's what it is about, paying it forward and being able to, when we leave here, we leave something behind, right? And that might be some kids with some knowledge and some people with some a little bit bigger skill set. So that's good, man. Well, Jake, I'm glad we got a chance to sit down and chat about all this stuff and get a lot of your insights on the Type 4 stuff. And by all means, when you want to come on with anything new and updated and something that you want to kind of help expose some of these some of the other VW enthusiasts too, man, by all means let me know, because it's funny, there's a lot of people that listen to this that don't have Facebook and don't have this other means. They just throw on a program of their Volkswagen hobby and like to listen and get some of their insight from different media. So anytime you want to come back and talk about something new and great you're working on, because we haven't even touched in that new cooling system you're doing. So definitely want to follow up with you and get some of that stuff going. But I know you gotta get out there. You got some hunting to do today, don't you?
Yeah, I'm heading down to duck hunt at my property, and it's still deer season too. So I'm very much a avid outdoorsman. That's how I try to have some therapy. The shop's therapy, but that's a different kind of therapy. So,
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, this podcast is great. The way that you've got your reach and how broad the spectrum is and who you've had on the show. I'm not even one that listens to podcasts, like I told you, until a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I knew you had one, but I'd never listened to it. When I'm working on things, I don't have a radio going. I don't listen to stuff. There's no TVs. It's just like I'm in the zone, right? And it's the same way for anybody that I have here. So I don't have to listen to something in the background or even in a car. So when I honestly, until last couple of weeks, I hadn't even listened to any of your podcasts, but definitely, you've done a great thing here. And I do have a lot of stuff in the works, and it's that outside the box stuff that people really don't get exposure to, because I've learned, like even on Facebook and stuff, I don't share anything anymore, because you get to a point where you just don't want to hear it. You just don't want to hear and this is the thing, like people are like, well, if I can't afford that, I have to bash that or I have to villainize that. And it was that way when engines cost $8,500.
Yeah.
Now the engines cost over $40,000. It's definitely that way. But what I've learned is that the people that truly are appreciative of what we do, they're not Facebookers or Instagrammers or Xers or any of that anyway. Most of them are going to listen to something like this, or they're still going to pick up a catalog or a magazine. There's still that type of person. So I've learned that getting out there, like I used to post so much on forums, I just don't do it anymore. I mean, I used to have my own forums. I mean, I used to be on Shop Talk and did all that, but I went from sharing everything to basically sharing nothing.
Yeah. Well, you listen, you can only so much bring stuff to the well. Like, hey guys, look what I've been working on. And then it's just like the people that are taking it in aren't saying anything. And all the naysayers are just clouding your head with full bunch of negativity. It's like, why am I even sharing this with you guys if it's so unappreciated? You know what I mean? And so I totally get it, man. I mean, there's just been this whole move from where I happened to be working on another project and I happened to pop on the Samba for something. And I thought, man, I think I stopped posting on the Samba somewhere around 2010 because I was posting on a build I was doing, and just a bunch of, there's a couple, keyboard warriors on there that got on and said some stuff. And I'm just like, why do I even care to come share the stuff with these guys if they're, if they don't care to hear from it, or if the only people that are going to speak up are people with negative comments? It's like, I don't need that. So, and I've noticed a bunch of people from our generation have kind of swayed away from there, and they're just kind of doing stuff when they want to do stuff, putting stuff out there. And it's like the time and reputation kind of stands for itself. So listen, you've been good at doing what you've been doing for a long time, man, and keep doing what you're doing. And when you and Mario get that new intake setup dialed in, man, let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be good. We're taking the time it takes to do it, and it's going to be done right. Of course, like anything, it's not going to be cheap. So, of course, people have to villainize it because they think it's expensive. That's just the way that it is. So, again, we stopped posting stuff about that just because of a lot of the flack that you catch. And then a lot of times there's other motivations. Some of these people have aliases or whatever, and they come in and they, you never know who's like a company dialed in with a competitor or something. But the way I look at it, I don't have any competition, and I really never have, because everybody is barking up a different tree than I am. Yeah. They might think that they're my competitor, but I don't think they are, because I see what they're doing and I want to do it differently than them. I want to make everything here, and I want to make it my own way, and I want it to have a certain flavor. And so you never know who these people are that are posting things. You never know what their motivations are. And in the Porsche world, that stuff's even more ruthless and more brutal, because the price tags on everything's a lot higher. When you invent something that saves a few 100,000 engines, you become a target for a lot of people who are jealous that they didn't have the same invention idea that you did. But at the end of the day, they had the same chance you did. They just didn't engage their brain, and they didn't do it, and they didn't follow through with it. And, so there's a lot of that, but, and that's why, like most professionals that I know, that I've got groups of all these technicians that I've trained and guys that are my certified installers for all these products. You don't see any of them posting anything anywhere, because we're all tired of it. After 20, I've been online since 1997, man. And, like you said, the Samba is a wonderful site for classifieds. But if you want to get pissed off, that's the first place you go, Yeah. And so what I did just last night, and I never do this, I was actually looking for a couple of parts for one of my cars, and I got on the Samba, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go search my name on the forums and see what happens. But I was surprised. Out of probably 4 or 5 pages that I looked at, I never go on there. There was only like one negative thing. And I think what it is because all the things that I said and the things that I posted on there 20 years ago when John Conley and I were teaming up, and everybody, the big thing was compression ratio. Like, oh my God, you got to listen to the Berg Blue Book. You can't run more than 7-to-1 compression. And we're sitting there like, no, combustion is a life. Compression is a lifeblood of combustion. You've got to have enough compression for this engine to be efficient. And John and I and other people who had experienced this are talking about it, and everybody's like, "That's BS. There's no way. You got to go this way. It's gonna kill itself." After 20 years,
yeah,
it kind of proved we were right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I even saw some of the people on there last night who used to be against me were not against me anymore because their experiences, probably because they learned something from me that they applied themselves and saw it was true, also proved what I said.
Yeah.
So I was actually really pleasantly surprised to see what I saw with that,
Yeah. Well, listen, you've done good, and your work has stood for itself, man. So congratulations to that. And it's been great chatting with you, Jake. And
yeah, same here. And I'll certainly come on. The biggest breakthrough is the cylinder technology, just because imagine if you go buy a brand new Porsche today, I can build a Type 4 that has the exact same cylinder technology as that from a wear surface perspective and piston ring design perspective, and put that on a 60-year-old engine with the exact piece of machinery, which actually comes with a price tag of about $1.6 million. And we'll have the only one at LN Engineering in the world outside in the aftermarket world. The only one. The only people that have this are OEs, meaning Ford, Porsche, Polaris uses some of this. That will be the only machine in the entirety of the automotive aftermarket.
Oh, that's cool. Well, that's fantastic. Again, pushing the envelope for better technology for some of our old air-cooled stuff. So, well, Jake, if people want to get in touch with you, best ways through your website, Facebook page. What are your places people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, aircooledtechnology.com has been the domain since 1997. I will say that when you go there, there is a link to start a submission ticket. Just follow that. Don't try to call me. The phone's just going to ring. The phone never really rings today, but if you call, it's the last way to get a hold of me. Just submit a ticket. I'll return that within 24 hours, even on Christmas. I did one yesterday, doing one today. But that's the best way to get in touch with me. I will say that a few months ago, we had some Russian hackers hack the website, and they locked us out of it. So we had to restore an older version of it, and the older version is up there. So any price or whatever you see is actually from about 10 years ago. It was the only thing we could do while we're trying to rebuild the site, which I should have it rebuilt about the second week of January. So everything that's on there now is completely out of date, but the way to reach me there through aircooledtechnology.com is still active. I don't use email here. We do everything through the submission tickets, so that's the best way to reach me.
Well, right on. Well, Jake, man, it was great chatting with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
Yep, same here, man. Thank you.
All right, Jake, have a good one.
You too.
If you like that podcast, make sure you guys subscribe, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review so you get a shout out on the podcast. And if you pick up some merch or send me an email, bill@letstalkdubs.com, I'll read your email and give you a shout out on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to a good 2026. Hopefully you guys will have a great year this year as well. And we've got plenty more podcasts for you to come. So this makes 340 something. So let's get them done. Let's get them out there, guys. Saving history one podcast at a time. And until next week, guys, later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.